Hey, this is Zac.
And I'm Clint, and we wanted to thank Exo-terra for sponsoring this episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Exo-terra is the industry leader in glass terrarium enclosures, and we are a big fan of getting to see the species we work with both at home and at the university.
We utilize Exo-terra caging here at Metazotics, and in addition to top quality terrariums, Exo-terra offers an array of heating options, lighting, supplements, decor, and truthfully anything needed or wanted when keeping reptiles.
Thank you, Exo-terra, for supporting Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of CCR, Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. As always, Zac is here with my good friend, brother from another mother, Mr. Clint Bartley. How are you, sir?
Great, my friend. I'm great. How are you doing, Zac?
I'm doing well. We're at a point in the semester where I'm not going to give the illusion that things are calming down, but things are getting manageable. How about that? The frenetic fire hose effect is kind of that edge is going away. I still probably have more to do than any sane human being, but we're tolerable now, so things are looking up, and it should be this way for the rest of the semester. I say that now. There's probably some crazy ass thing going on with the water monitor at school, or all the bull snakes are getting some crazy whatever as I say this, because that's what happens when you tempt Murphy. But right now we're going to just ease into tonight, because tonight's going to be a really good one. As the guy writing the Hognose Snake book, we have Jeff Galewood of JMG Reptiles is our guest tonight. So I'm super pumped about some heterodon time.
Yeah, I am too. I got to do an episode on Jeff's show just a couple weeks ago, and had a really good time. So I'm looking forward to having him on.
Yeah. So, updates. I know you went somewhere this past weekend. Where was that somewhere that you went?
Well, I was at Tinley, and I always have a great time at Tinley. Now, I'll tell you, you talked about this is when things are supposed to be slowing down, for you. And I've been looking forward to this week for a while, and it's because as much as I love the shows that I go to and seeing everyone, we did 4 shows in 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And
2 big ones.
Yeah. And I'm exhausted. One of them I didn't even do, Anna, which I want to give a big shout out to. She performed her first show solo representing Metazotics. It was our local show here in Evansville. And so I didn't do it. I helped her obviously pack up, and then went and set up with her, and then went and helped tear down. But it's kind of I don't want to be out of the shop that many weekends in a row. I feel like I need to be here. It was another way for us to start branching out. So she did a great job. But, I was looking forward to this week, because it's like, okay, finally the shows will be over. I can turn my attention. But then I looked, I've got this week off. This week, I say off, meaning this week in the store.
Off.
Right. But not this weekend, but next. I've got another show. Like, why did you do this to yourself? So, but it's all good. And Tinley was certainly fun. And I'm going to talk more about Tinley in the market update segment. But I do have a Tinley story that I have to share. Now, normally this isn't, one piece of this isn't something I'd talk about, but I'm going to have to, because, oh my gosh. So I, just like most people that go to a rather large show like that, I take a certain amount of money with me because you never know, right? You never know what you're going to run into, that one thing. Or for me, it may not be that animal that, oh my God, I have to have it. It may be some phenomenal deal that I want to take because it's going to be great for the store in the long run. Or, different supplies, I picked up a large order from Josh's Frogs, substrates, things like that. So you combine that, because I always am proud of myself when I don't spend the money that I take. But combine that with the, money made over the weekend, cash taken in. Normally I will lock all that up in our cash box, and that's how we end up bringing that home. But for some reason, I went ahead and took the cash out, and I think it was because I knew that I would be leaving everything in the trailer and in the vehicle overnight, because it was such a late night. We'd be coming home. I was just going to take the animals inside, everything else get unloaded. So I want to take cash out. So I've got a rather large sum in my pocket. And I was loading my trailer, which was a good haul from where I was at in the convention center, all the way out through the parking lot where the trailer was parked. And this was before the show had officially ended. And what I was loading, I hadn't even tore our booth down yet. I was actually loading up the Exo-terra booth. All their things came home with us, as one of their vendors, and I was able to acquire that. And that took about 7 trips. And I'm talking with a full cart stacked as high as I am, about 7 trips. So on the very last trip, I was by myself, and we had the last 2 things on the cart were these 2 large totes filled with substrate. So these are heavy as hell. And again, I'm by myself. So I picked the last one up. And at this point, my 10-foot trailer is full. I mean, full. So nothing else could go in the trailer. So I have to put this in the back of the truck. So I pick it up, throw it with a knee, heave it into the truck. And when I do, this large amount of cash in my pocket shoots out and onto the ground. Now, for those listening, you know that this is the Tinley Show, and that's what you hear is that word Tinley. But let me explain where Tinley is located. Tinley is right outside of Chicago. Chicago is also known as the Windy City.
Yeah.
And on Saturday, that wind was kicking and swirling. So when this cash hits, whoo, it scatters. So now here's my fat ass running around out there like a game show contestant, crawling under cars. I'm shoving this stuff and just holding it against my belly, trying to shove all this in there's 100 flying here, 50s flying there, 20s over there. I'm scrambling around. Luckily, the show had an idiot. There's nobody else out there in this side of the parking lot but me. And I mean, I'm literally diving under cars to grab these bills and then shoving them in a backpack. Looking like an idiot. Oh man, I was so hot. I mean, I was just fuming at myself, for this. But so that's
did you get it all back?
As far as I can tell.
As far as I was going to say.
So here's what I will say to any Tinley attendee. If you happen to have found any money just blowing around in the parking lot, consider that a gift certificate from Metazotics.
There you go.
So yeah, that was interesting. That was fun. And this is going to be completely unrelated. I meant to tell you this on our last episode, and I know I'm going to forget if I don't. But if there's any group of people that are going to appreciate this story, it's going to be the group that has listened to multiple episodes of this show. Yeah. So you remember when we posted the pictures, this has been, I don't know, month and a half ago, of my son Dexton when he flipped that big rat snake.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I forgot to tell you about the ride home, and Christina reminded me of this just the other day. So on the ride home, he says something about that big black rat snake. And I said, well, technically, that's now a gray rat snake. And my 9-year-old proceeds to lose his shit.
He's your son, Clint.
Yeah, yes. He says, well, what do you mean it's a gray rat snake? And I go, they keep reclassifying the taxonomy. It was a black rat snake, then it was a midland, then it was now it's, there's western, there's eastern, this is a gray rat snake, not a black rat snake. And he's like, no, that I feel like I've been lied to my entire life.
There you go.
And he goes on this 9-year-old rant about it being a black rat snake and they're wrong and they just need to leave it alone. And this is what it's supposed to be. Just look at it. And the whole time I'm up here laughing because I'm like, this must be what I sound like.
It is.
It is. You are my son. I've never been so proud of you. We may not have a scientific leg to stand on, but we're obstinate about this. So yeah, I figured you'd like that, and maybe some of our listeners get a kick out of it too. So But yeah, it was a great time. I'm going to talk more about the show whenever we hit the market update. The only other update I'll throw out here, as far as here at the shop, we have our final 2 clutches of eggs hatching right now.
Really?
We've got a clutch of balls that are hatching, and I literally just happened to check the other incubator as I was walking from the back room to my office to turn everything on for tonight's episode, and our clutch of subocs are hatching right now. They keep. I always produce just enough to keep me trying. It's not a species I do great with, but it's always just enough to tease me. Just here's a taste. Try again next year. Yeah,
dangling on the line.
That's pretty much it. So that's what's going on with me. What's up with you?
Nothing really. Now that I have the grants written, the reports turned in, I got some grading to do. Colubrid Fest is over with and done, but we're moving on. I actually just yesterday I had a phone call with Mike Clarkson talking about IHS, and said, I think we may want to consider doing what we did at Colubrid Fest over having talks and go with the panels more, or maybe a hybrid panel / talks day. So more on that. There's no rest for the wicked. So
I like it.
And as a reminder, IHS last year was in Knoxville. We will be there for that. We're doing the Herpetoculture Day. They want to really promote the Herpetoculture Day at IHS this year, which is a pretty big deal. And it's in Punta Gorda, Florida. So we
will be there. Both of us will be there.
Herping at night, reptile nerd stuff during the day. I can't really think of a better time. This is going to be a good one. So anywho, but I was talking with Mike about that, and we're going to be, recruiting talks and thinking about panels. So Colubrid Fest still impacting things in good ways. And then the only other thing I have is that I got a burr up my ass. I don't know how else to say it. About a month and a half ago, where I just was like, I need bull snakes in my life. And I was like, no, you don't. And then it was like, no, I do. I really do need bull snakes in my life. And so at Colubrid Fest, there was the albino bull.
Gorgeous.
And it was in the auction. And it went for a very good price for what it was. So I went for that. And I just gotten a Kankakee female. I really like the northeastern Kankakee look. And so I was on Morph Market. And it was one of those days where I was on Morph Market and I just had no will. And then suddenly a trio of subadult Kankakees drops. And I was like, mine. So got those. And then at the exact same time, I can't say your last name, Dean, but you all know who I'm talking about. Dean Alessandrini in Cincinnati put up brand new females. I called him, talked to him about those. They're a different bloodline than everybody else. So in a matter of 48 hours, I'm going from 1 Kankakee to 5, 6. So now I have a very good group of bull snakes.
Nice. Very nice.
And I'm going to be thinning the herd of king snakes. I decided that some of them, like the Floridana, are staying. The Getula are staying. But Holbrook I love them to death, but I just don't like watching them die. So if you like Harris County bright yellow speckled king snakes and you're listening to this, I don't really want to get rid of them, but if you message me, they might be yours. Because I had a lot of people having interest in those. And then I have a lot of Splendida, the Desert Kings, and I love Desert Kings, but I don't really need to have 12 of them. I counted and was like, how the hell did you get 12? When did 12 show up? It was one of those. So we're going to trim down the king snakes and get the Pitchophis in midlife. And then our podcast with Michael, the last episode before this one, that was we've had all of the episodes impact you. I think that's a fair statement. But I really was impressed with Michael's hyper focus with initiative driving it. I don't know how to there was this bigger purpose to what he was doing.
Right. That's the best way to say it right there.
And he wasn't arrogant about it. He wasn't you could just tell it
his passion. He loved it.
It was his passion. It's why he was doing it. And it really has made me think over the past, days since we recorded that. So I'm going to be doing some realignment in the my personal collection here. And then I can't believe we're doing this, but we're like already starting to pair things at the university. We put our yellowtail Crebos together. We had a cold front move through, real strong front. So they're together right now. We had our meeting today about brumation. So who's going to go down, who's coming to the garage corner. We talk about all the time. Like we're already there. I can't believe we're already flying. Yeah. So anyway, but that's really my updates is I just have a lot more pits in my life now. And that's good. And then now that I got a lot of the things I needed to get done, this was my plan the entire time is by mid-October, Hognose Snake book, full throttle. And I actually think that we're going to do that. In fact, the science update tonight, I'm going to be introducing a super important hognose paper since we're doing Hognose Snakes this episode. I thought this was the best time to do that. So that's my update.
So, there's another update I think that CCR should put out there, as the two of us here. And that's, so we've had some interesting conversations and things that we've kind of locked in place for the two of us for this year. And that's places we're going to be.
Yeah, we really haven't talked about that.
No, we haven't. And so I feel that we might want to go ahead and throw that out there because we're hoping that we get to meet more people.
We want to meet people.
So one, while we're still locking our travel in, I think we both have committed at this point.
We are.
That CCR is, we have been generously given a table by some friends. And we will be set up at the Pomona show in January.
Yeah.
So you're going to have the hillbillies. We're going to be the Beverly Hillbillies, baby. I mean,
hell yeah. This is my first time in California ever, dude.
Yeah. Well, I've been to California. I've been to Fresno several times, and everybody from California, when I tell them that, they go, "You've not been to California." Yeah. So I'm like, okay. But yeah, so we're going to get to meet some of our friends out there that we just know online. We'll see a couple friends that we have met in person, but we're hoping that there's the West Coast listeners that never get to the shows that we're at that will come out and see us. We'll have a table set up. We'll be there, and we're just looking to have a great time. So that is in January. And then in May, where Reptile Talks, where's that happening? Anaheim. So we'll be in California again. The two of us set up there, CCR, and same thing. We're really hoping to get to meet some more of the West Coast peeps, and I think that's going to be a blast. And then, as you said, in June we'll be down in Florida for IHS, and so again, hoping to meet people there. And we think that's all we're putting on our plate. Who knows if something else pops up, that we may be interested in, but that's certainly that's further than where we normally travel. So, so that's exciting. And, we want to thank you all for the support. We want to thank our Patreon members because you're helping make this happen, for us to be able to go 100%. Do episodes out there and see people. So thank you.
And for the Patreon listeners, we want to thank Max because Max has worked his ass off, and we already have the first round of Colubrid Fest talks up on Patreon. So they are there. And I also want to do a special shout out to Sarah Moore. We kind of flubbed when we were recording her talk during Colubrid Fest. We had the battery die on one of our cameras and didn't realize it. And I asked Sarah do you mind recording your talk again? And she did it immediately. And so we have her questions. So she redid her talk, and we're going to tack on the questions. That's not up there yet because I literally just gave it to Max like an hour ago. But by the time you're listening to this, it should certainly be up and ready to go. So there you go. All right. Stuff. Yeah, no, it's going to be a crazy year.
It's going to be a fun one. It's going to be a blast. Yeah, we're going to have fun.
All righty. Do you want to do market update? Or do you want me to do fine?
I can start, no problem. First, I guess I should probably talk about pickups, Tinley pickups, because I actually did come home with some neat stuff. Some of which I didn't plan on it. I did pick up a couple more locality gray bands. I know when you go in, go all in, right? So I've got a few more gray bands, but one thing that I guess I'm going to enter the argument.
Oh,
I'm going to enter the debate. Honestly, I'm just getting my feelers out here. So for years and years, people have gone, you keep rhino rats, right? No, never have. You keep rhino rats, right? No. I think it's just because when you have this many Asians, it's a natural, expectation. So I had 2 fall in my lap, basically. A pair of yearling females, individual who wanted to come over, trade for some mandarins and things like that. And I'm like, these aren't hatchlings. You know what I mean? These are yearlings. They look great. And it's funny the way it works out, because I pop both of them and I get females, but one of their tails looked like I would have thought it was going to be a male, but I got nothing. And so I said, let's walk over to Rob, have Zirkle double check these for me, because I've never popped rhinos, and let's just make sure I'm not have a more experienced set of hands on this species. So we walk over, and I told him what I saw. Rob looks at him, he goes, yeah, this tail does look male, and he's popping them, but nope, 2 females. He got the same thing I did, and my hands are resting on his display case, and I look down, and they're resting on an adult male rhino. Okay, Rob, I'll be back. I'm gonna take this too. He's take it. So so yes, I've now come home with a trio of rhino rats. My kids already love them. They think those are cool. In addition to that, friend of the show, PJ Crone of Handmade Herps, got to hang out with PJ a lot in Tinley. And we did a little trading, and I came home with a breeding pair of captive bred red-eye crocodile skinks.
Oh, nice.
And those are pretty cool. So those are going to be staying at the shop. Those are set up. Anna got those all decked out and done, and that's looking great. So those were the primary pickups. I'm shipping some snakes out to some friends that picked some out as well. But it was great. I mean, it was a great time. Cool. So good pickups. As far as the market update, so here are some things I want to share. First and foremost, the market update is, of course, sponsored by Show Me Reptiles. Check out the Show Me Reptile shows. There's always going to be some for you. You can see them at showmesnakes.com. They'll list out. You can see months in advance when a show is going to be near you, as well as check out the Show Me Marketplace. This is obviously it's a growing platform. Buyers are validated, so it's not, you're not going to get it weeds out scammers, their process. And so I really like that. It's really neat. Check them out. And, you guys already know our thoughts on Show Me and Mickey and everything he did for the Colubrid community with Colubrid Fest. So as a reminder, support those that support us, and by us, I don't mean CCR. I mean, us as Colubrid keepers, all over. Thank you, Mickey. Okay. As I said, I did want to always start with what the top 3 searches were for the last couple weeks. Last week, still at number 1, the number 1 search is ball python. Number 2 is bearded dragon. Number 3 is tortoise. So no colubrid listed in the top 3 searches. I still think that's funny to me. But again, it goes on to show that those searches right there tell me that we still have a lot of new individuals coming into the hobby quite a bit. So, and that's very encouraging because we know where, we were all new at one point, and then we become specialized. So, all right. Tinley. This was a slow Tinley show. Now, when I say that, and Jeff was there, we'll see if, he shares the same thoughts if he wants to chat about it. But I don't like saying it was a bad show at all. Don't get me wrong. Because when you compare the number of people through the door compared to other shows, it's still a strong show. But for Tinley, I could feel that the door count was down. And really, you base that off of 2 factors. One, what's the door buster? Meaning, when the door opens, what's the flood feel like? And that really wasn't the case this year. Number 2, there's a lot of times in Tinley that you have difficulty walking down an aisle. And that really wasn't the case. There's times where there's tables you wait for a hole to open for you to get into to see, and really didn't experience that. So from a buyer standpoint, it was great because it was not nearly as hard to be able to view everything. From a vendor standpoint, it was a little soft. Now, I want to make sure everyone understands by me saying this, I'm not saying Tinley's a dying show. I'm not, because I'm going to tell you why in just a moment, in my opinion, that this happened. But I'm just saying that this particular year, this particular show, it was a slower one. And for the vendors that I spoke to, it's not that anybody did poorly. It was just soft compared to,
Gotcha.
Tinley expectations. Okay. I do have to say that there was a lot of Colubrid Fest chatter through that, whether it was for the vendors that were vending. There was a lot of, I'm certainly glad I did Colubrid Fest because of how things were progressing that day. And there was a whole lot of, I wish I'd have done Colubrid Fest, that type of thing.
Okay.
And it's still, guys, please don't think that we're like, haha, Colubrid Fest. It's, because again, we said from a show promotion standpoint, Colubrid Fest didn't win, in any way. So there's still a lot of things that need to take place, but it was good for the vendors. They still raised over $100,000 for US Arc, at the auctions. So, I mean, there was still quite a bit. I think it was a record for them this year. Quite a bit happened there. So there was still, money to be tossed, but with the crowd being a little softer, it made me start looking at what those causes would be. And I think there are three main things at play. Again, in my opinion, first would be straight industry related. And that's, as we all know, that the ball python market is in one of its downward cycles. And I say, it's not crashing, it's cyclical. So as it dips down, it's going to come right back up. So don't run and, it's crashing now, but we know it's in one of its downward cycles. And of course, what drives the Tinley show, same thing that drives a lot of the real big shows, and that's the ball python crowd. And with that being down, I think the crowd was softer, because of it. In addition to that, we had a regional, I say regional, but really a weather issue. When you have two hurricanes smack the Southeast back to back. I mean, we have friends. Jason Hood couldn't even make it to vend his own tables because of what was going on down there. And I think there was a lot of other individuals, because there's a lot that come up from Florida to hit that Tinley show. And I think that obviously affected, quite a bit coming through as well. But then the final one, and we've really not talked about this, but coming from an individual who spent time in other industries, and a big part of what my previous role was having friends in various industries so that we can determine when we were seeing something very positive or very negative, we had to figure out if we were causing it or if we were just being affected by it. One thing that it's always true is when you are in an election year, the economy starts to become fearful. I don't care which side you are, left or right. I don't care which guy or girl is in the lead. I don't care who you're going for or who you're not. Everyone starts to panic, and you start seeing the average spend dry up the closer it gets. Yes, because if your person doesn't win, the world's going to explode, and that's kind of what they put out there for you. And that's one of the things I haven't talked about, but because this was the first time this year I really saw it, in play. And I'm like, there it is. It was bound to happen. And now you kind of see it on a grand stage. So really, I think those are the three things that slowed this Tinley up, which tells me that my guess is at March of next year, those three things we'll see where we'll see where the ball python market is, but two of those things are going to be off the board at least. And then with the influx of tax checks, boom, the March Tinley is going to be right back up where it was. So, so there's that. I did want to mention that there was, I got to do a lot of really awesome conversations, I had with individuals. I talked to JT, the owner of Repti Chip. We had a great talk. I like that guy so much. He helps me out here, at the shop whenever, there's product that I'm wanting to do something special with it. Robin from Redline Shipping. Robin shouted out at me and got to chat with him. And, so as a reminder, CC Radio 5 with Redline Shipping will save you $5. utilize that. And Robin has already expressed extreme interest in Colubrid Fest. So you will see Redline at next year's Colubrid Fest as a sponsor. He's all over it. Got to have a wonderful conversation with Emily and Ed from Snake Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as we've talked about them on the show before, we absolutely love what they do in terms of bringing more people to the hobby and doing it in such a positive way without clickbait, without that kind of, stuff. And forgive me, buddy, I didn't catch your name, but I hope you hear this and know I'm talking about you. While talking to Emily and Ed, when talking to Emily and Ed, because they actually approached me to ask me about Colubrid Fest. I thought that was just amazing. And so we're chatting for a while, and while talking to him, a gentleman came by, patted me on the shoulder, and looked at Emily and Ed and says, "This guy has the best podcast out there." And I was like, "Ah." And both of them, they kind of laugh and they go, and I can't remember if they said IT or sound, but I think it was something like, "That's our sound guy." So it's somebody who works for Snake Discovery. I'm giving you a shout out, buddy. That was awesome. Made my night there. So thank you so much. But again, all in, I feel that Tinley was again a little softer, not incredibly surprised whatsoever with the kind of macro pieces that we just mentioned a moment ago. And I wouldn't let it deter anyone whatsoever, because my guess is come March, that's going to be right back up. And really, once we get past November, it's, things are going to kind of go back the way that they're supposed to be. So all in, that's the market update. Hopefully that gave you guys what you're after. So bring it on with the science.
All righty. Give me 1 second while we try to do this. Hold on a minute. Here we go. Boom and bam. All right. So the science update is presented weekly or not weekly, but each episode by Rare Genetics Inc. Rare Genetics Inc., as we all know, supports Science Update, and they need your help. I'm going to just keep saying this every episode, guys. We have the ability through Ben and Kayla and company to do what's been done with ball pythons and actually dig in on the actual genes so that you can get your snakes tested with a genetic test and find out if you do indeed have the gene for Arctic or lavender, candy cane, whatever. They're working with corn snakes now. I know they want to work with hognose snakes, but for us to get to that point, we got to get them to shed skins. So if you're interested in doing that, reach out to me. I can tell you how to do it. You can also reach out to Ben and Kayla at RGI. And we are thrilled to death to have RGI sponsoring our science update. So the science update today, in honor of Jeff being on the show, Hognose Snakes being on the show, I know it was 1 or 2 episodes ago, I told everybody that I was rereading Platt and I made a test and I was testing myself on this and I failed my own test.
I remember that. Yeah.
Remember that? Yeah. Well, this is the actual publication that I failed. If you're going to do anything with the ecology of hognose snakes in any way, you have to be acquainted with this particular publication. And if you want a copy of this publication, I obviously have it. You're looking at it. I'm sharing a copy of it from my computer. All you need to do is email me. You can find my email online and say in the subject line, hognose snake paper or Platt paper, and I will email you a copy of this, and that will be my good deed for the day, because there really isn't a better natural history paper on both the eastern hognose snake, Heterodon platyrhinos, and the western or plains hognose snake, Heterodon nasicis, than what is affectionately referred to as Platt 1969 or just simply Platt. So Dwight R. Platt was a PhD student at Kansas. Everything turned blue. Don't know why. There we go. And he was a grad student of one of my personal heroes, and this guy's name was Dr. Henry Fitch. I literally based the foundation of my crayfish lab off of what Fitch did as a herpetologist. And what Fitch studied is this thing called odd ecology, AUT ecology. And that literally means everything. So the way you do odd ecology work is you find a population of an animal, and you go to the same spot and capture the animals, and you do it year after year after year after year after year after year. I'm talking like 5-10 years in a row, and you mark the animals. And the goal is to recapture the animals and show and see, okay, between this month or this year, I caught the animal. It's been 13 months. It's grown X amount. It weighs X amount now. That's an increase of X amount. And you take that data and you can then basically paint a picture of the animal's life. But to do that, you have to have hundreds of captures. So the only way you can do that is to quite literally just live outside. So all of us that say, like, I just want to be outside, you know, this is the kind of romantic form of ecology that people think ecologists do, but in the world we live in today, you don't get to do this anymore. And the project that I'm going to be using the Colubrid Fest funds for is basically being modeled off of this paper. So I have an opportunity to do the modern day version of Platt. And that is such a monumental thing to say out loud. I feel kind of shameful, even remotely putting into the ether that I can achieve what this man achieved with these snakes. But the population we're studying, I think through a lot of hard work, we can get a lot of captures over a lot of time. And I'm very happy that the people have agreed to let us work there this coming summer. And I'm sharing on YouTube. If you've got YouTube, you can watch the video. But you know, when you look at this, it's published as the proceedings of the University of Kansas. So it doesn't start on page 1. They just kind of start. You know, it's a journal basically, but this is a book. This is what we call a monograph. It starts on page 256 and ends on page 405, and that's nothing but hognose snake goodness. So there's a tremendous amount of information in here, and if you're a hognose snake keeper and you even remotely want to incorporate natural history into your keeping, this is your nonstop shop. So what Platt did is, as a student of Fitch, who was at the University of Kansas, he had study sites. One of those was in Harvey County, Kansas, in a sand prairie. And he went out to the sand prairie, and Fitch was notorious for drift fences. So you set up a drift fence. It's called passive sampling. And you let these drift fences catch the snakes rather than you go out and try to catch them. And if you can set them up in the right habitat, drift fences catch way more snakes than active herping does. And so what Platt did is he set up his drift fences in various habitats, compared capture rates, and then every single snake he caught, he would measure, he would make it regurgitate. If it had food in it, he would sex it. If they were gravid, he would palpate for eggs. And then he did a lot of really cool natural history observation of just what temperature is the sand? What temperature is the sand 6 centimeters underground? What temperature is the sand 10 centimeters underground? He did a really interesting thing with the hogs where he would take bobbins. This was really popular in the 60s. You'd take thread and tie it around the hognose snake and then kind of put a stick down through the bobbin of thread and then let the snake go and then just follow the thread as it goes through the field. And by doing that, he was able to figure out that, like Nassicus, the western hogs, at nighttime, they just randomly find a bit of sand and go about 5 centimeters underground and chill. And nobody knew that before Platt did that. Platt also, with this paper, built these outdoor pens. This is one of the things I think is really interesting, and kept the snakes outside and basically kept tabs of, do they use the same burrows? Can you identify a hognose snake burrow? Platt's one of the first people to come up with this idea that they make a D-shaped entrance to their burrow, which I've used that in the field and actually found one Plains hognose snake by seeing a burrow that looks like that. But, you know, we have subheadings here, like everything from the fossil record and evolutionary history, geographic range and habitat, temperature, periodicity, shelters and burrowing, locomotion and prowling behavior, home range and movements, reproduction, growth ecdysis, food habits, disease and mortality, population levels, relation to man, ecological comparisons, and then a summary. So it's impossible. I could do a 2-hour podcast on this freaking paper. I'm not doing that. I am looking at the time and trying to limit myself. But this is basically the paper. And what's really fun about Platt is when Fitch had his students do this, he also had them do a complete review of everything that was known about hognose, or about their study organism up to this point. And so, while it's old, this thing was, I was born in 79. So this thing was 10 years old when I was born. It's still great because it's also a pretty epic literature review of all the early lit on Heterodon. And as someone who's been tasked with writing a book, gathering that early lit is much more difficult than gathering the late lit. So I spent about an hour and a half, 2 hours today going through the food habits section, making a great big table. Just that section was great. Everybody talks about how Hognose snakes eat toads. We all know toads, Anaxarus, formerly known as bufo. That's the toads, right? Well, at Harvey Park, they ate more leopard frogs than toads. So there's definitely some evidence in this work that kind of shows the ecological plasticity of the Hognose snakes or Heterodon. And then the other thing that's really cool is he studied both of them. He didn't just study one. So you can kind of see the little quirks between the Easterns and the Westerns, at least in Kansas. So it's an absolutely wonderful, wonderful natural history nerd book. I'll call it a book. And I have a copy of it. I've talked about this, I know, at least once on the podcast. There was a herpetologist for the state of Virginia. He wasn't for the state of Virginia, but he lived in Virginia. He was very close to my graduate advisor. His name was Dr. Joe Mitchell. And Joe Mitchell, unfortunately, passed away. He was actually hit by a car helping a reptile cross the road.
Terrible.
Yeah, so horrible passing. And I have a buddy, Mike Crick Books. If you want to get obscure reptile books, hit up Mike. And I told Mike, you ever get this book, Plat 69, I want to get a copy of it. And sure enough, about a month and a half later, he said, I got one. And so I bought it. And my copy is actually Joe Mitchell's copy, and it's signed by Joe, which this is one of the most, treasured things I have herpetologically, being a mid-Atlantic herp person. So anyway, but I got a PDF of it. I can email it to anybody. If you like hogs, you're listening to this because you like hogs. I don't care. It's 2024 when we're recording this. If it's 2026 when you're hearing this for the first time, hopefully my email's the same. Fire off an email and I will gladly get it to you because I would love to share the good word of Platt. So with that being said, that's what I have for the science update. And I hope I pass my test. So
if not, I'm sure you'll let yourself hear about it.
Yeah, I will. All right. So that was our science update for the day. So with that being said, I think we're ready to bring on our guest. You agree?
I think so. I think we're ready. I'm sure he's tired of sitting back there and hearing us yapping, right?
Heck yeah. So without further ado, bring to the stage right now, we have Jeff Galewood of JMG Reptiles. How are you, sir?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on. Nice to meet you, Zach. And nice talking to you again, Clint.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the one thing you're talking about was the Tinley crowd. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it definitely was lighter than I think that's the lightest I've seen it in probably like 7 years, I feel like, if I had to take a guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Like I said, and it's one where I hate to say something like that because obviously I love Tinley. I love it's a good promotion that takes place with the NARBC. So it's nothing, talking negative about it whatsoever. It's just calling it like it is. It was a softer show than what Tinley normally is.
It's still good though, and that's the thing. Yeah. It's like not every Tinley can be a record breaker. I remember because I joked about it several times at the show because I remember the one show they had so many people coming in. They said that the fire marshal was like bitching at them and saying you can't let any more people in, and they were having an issue. And then they're having people wait. I guess in line is I might be wrong there, but that's what I thought was happening until more people exited. And then like this time I was telling people that the fire marshal was complaining that there weren't enough people in the show. That's obviously I made that part up. But yeah, it was still good. But yeah, it never got to the overwhelming where the people in the back are complaining because of the body heat from humans. It's getting too hot, and then people up front they're like it's kind of cool up here by the entrance. Although this time when I came into Tinley, it was like summer. It was like 85 degrees when I rolled in.
Yeah.
And
and that was one of the things I was so happy about until I, dropped the money is during load out that wind and it was a little cool. And so, cause normally that's what you're starting to get hot and sweaty, carrying all this stuff constantly, back and forth and making these long trips. But every time I get outside, I'm like, Ooh, it's okay. It's fall. You know?
I actually have a market question. The
Sure.
science. I've always wondered this, Jeff. How do you do it, Tinley, with the hogs? Is it a good show? Is it a show? Is it like where do you normally fall with that in sales and everything?
Well, Hognose, especially for the Tinley market, has evolved because it went from nobody being able to buy them that were Illinois residents, to then people have permits, to now people have like the Scott Baylor's made it easier for people to get permits for multiple. And then also the popularity of Hognose rising, and then Tinley becoming a bigger and bigger event that's getting more people going there. I will say that my best shows, though, were like 3 years ago when hardly anybody was vending there with Hognose. And I was like, I know it was great. It was great being like, it's pretty much like a dictatorship. It's like, you got to buy Hognose for me. Doesn't matter if you hate me, you got to do it. And so those sales were like really good because there wasn't much choice.
Whoa.
Oh,
there we go.
Okay. Sorry, you're thrown off stage for a second. We got you.
That's all right. So there's more people vending Hognose now, but the funny thing is my sales and the amount of Hognose I sold, the volume was like maybe a little less, but some of the sales were a little higher, and I'd say it was still actually pretty much like an average Tinley show. If I was going back like let's say 3-4 years ago, it was like right on par with that, maybe a little more. So I think it's like good because like that inflated market we had from COVID, the excess money, and then everybody staying at home, and then just overall like large demand everywhere really spiked everything. And now everything's kind of settling, but the sales were still good. And I actually got to count up my paper. That's the one thing, because I was like, I wonder, because then people started asking me, which is a good question. Nobody usually asks me this, but like, how many Hognose did you sell? I'm like, 3 people asking that. I'm like, damn, nobody ever asked me that. Like, specific numbers. They're not being like bold and saying like how much money did you make. I was like, I'm not going to share that anyway. But the numbers one, that's actually an interesting one. And so I have to do those invoices. So I have actually all that information. So I got to go back and look and see how many I sold. But from what I sold, because I had a good idea from filling out all these invoices, I'm like, oh yeah, my numbers are really pretty similar to like where they should be, I'd say.
That's good. Okay. That's good. I felt, as far as like number of snakes going off the table for me, it was definitely, again, lighter. It wasn't a bad show. I mean, it's still enough where it blows a lot in all the regional shows, out of the water. It's not a problem. Just kind of when I look at weekend to weekend, it was definitely softer. And to your same point, as I walked around, it was not that this was a colubrid show by any means. We know that's not the case, but there was certainly a lot more, vendors with colubrids on the table than what I've seen before. I mean, like Rob and I had that discussion where there's a lot more that look like some of our tables than what we are used to seeing. Because normally there's like 3 of us. Eric will have some bamboos. Eric Westmoreland, friend of the show, but outside of that, it's typically myself, the Exotic Empire, Josh Adler, and Rob Zirkle that has the majority of the Asians, on there. There'll be some out there that, so no offense to anybody if I'm not naming you. But I certainly saw a lot more this year to Jeff's point, when you combine those other things I was mentioning earlier, and then there was more availability of some of these species as more people were getting into Tinley with these species that I work with, I'm not surprised that my overall counts have come down a little bit. But
there you go.
So yeah, so there you go.
All right. So Tinley aside, Jeff, obviously you and I have a shared passion in Hognose snakes.
Yes.
I don't know how you two haven't met yet. Yeah. It just blew me away.
I don't know how we haven't either, because I stood about 15 feet away from you for 2 days last year at Tinley while I was signing my book at Russ Gurley's table.
Okay.
And I remember distinctly thinking, I think that's Jeff Galewood. I should probably go talk to him. But those of you who know me know that I was totally freaking overwhelmed. And my inner introvert was like, I am staying behind this table. This is my safe spot. This is where I dwell. So
It was funny too, Jeff, because whenever I was talking to him about you, I was like, hey, we're going to have Jeff on the show, and I think it'd be great, especially with you writing the Hognose book. And he goes, so in Tinley, when you first walk in the door, he's right there to the right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. How did you not go talk to him?
So, anywho, but we're good now. We're talking. So, and on that topic, how did you get into reptiles? Has this been a lifelong obsession? And then more specifically, when did the Hognose snakes roll in to play?
Hognose pretty early on. The obsession started because my dad was interested in reptiles and amphibians. He bred a lot of frogs, tortoises, and he did some geckos too. But he actually never had any snakes at that time. And so I grew up around them and always had that interest. And he had Reptiles magazine, monthly subscription. And I would love to look at those. And then by the time I was like, 7, that was probably actually when he was getting them. But I'm probably more around when I was the age of like 8 and 9. I was reading them a lot more. But he had an Audubon for North American reptiles. But it was all illustrations. They weren't actual pictures. But there's an illustration, and it's funny, of an eastern milk snake. And that happened to be the species I really liked because of this picture. I was like, wow, this is like, I just read about it. It's just like, it's a short little paragraph. But for like a 7-year-old, I kept just rereading it, and looking at the picture. I don't know how many times. Maybe been 5, maybe been 500. But for the longest time, I wanted an eastern milk snake. And it was until like when I was 8, I got one, and my dad picked it up from a reptile show. I remember it was an adult male. Later figured out it was a male, but he got it for like $25. So obviously this was like a wild caught one. And so that was my first pet snake. And then ever after that, I always wanted to go to reptile shows, and he wouldn't always take me to all of them just because as a kid, he knows I'm probably gonna get bored after an hour, and then when he complaining about stuff, and he's like, well, I'm going all day today, can't go. But sometimes I'd go to these the local NOAA shows, the Northeastern Ohio Association of Herpetoculture. And anyway, the one show, there was an adult female hognose. And you'll know what I'm talking about. Those plastic bins that had they were clear plastic, and they're really thin. They're like ultra fragile. And they had like a little like kind of cursive logo looking at the top. Norm Dam and a lot of old school people had used them in like makeshift rack systems. Somebody had one of those filled with sand, and they had an adult female hognose in there. And I'd seen it. I'd never seen I'd seen probably, I guarantee, the Eastern hognose and probably the Plains hognose in the illustrations of the book, but they just didn't really grab me at that time. And when I seen this adult Plains female, I was like, what is that? My dad's like, oh, that's a hognose snake. I've seen those before. And I kept coming back and looking at it. And then actually from that day on, that was my favorite snake. And I was always, and so I kept trying to, and it was so hard getting him back then. I've told this story a few times. I wanted to get, a Western hognose, and so I kept telling my dad about it. And after a few months, he kind of like got the, he got the hint that this wasn't going away, that I really did want. And so we started going to reptile shows, and then nobody was really breeding them at that point. The only ones were, they'd always, the funny thing is like Zirkles every now and then have one. And I remember it's either Zirkles or the Hampers. We went to one show, and it was like the second or third time this happened. And this one was after to be at the Armory in the Columbus, Ohio. And we got in, and there was a long line, and my dad's like, do you guys have any hognose? And it was either the Hampers or his Zirkles. I think it was Hampers, actually. I'm pretty positive it was Hampers. And we had one, but it just sold. And I just burst out in tears because this is like the first time it happened. And my dad's like, well, Jeffrey, what do you want? He goes, you eventually, he goes, this happens. He goes, you're eventually going to get one. And it took a while. I think it took like 6 or 8 months. I was supposed to get it for like my 9th birthday. And I think I got it like, by the time I was like, it was like 6-7 months past my birthday, or 8 months by the time I got this thing. And that guy almost didn't sell it to him. And that's actually my founder, Lemon Ghost Male Hognose. Believe it or not, Hognose is the founder of the Lemon Ghost Project.
Wow.
Yeah, the guy paid $45 for it. And I remember it clearly because his friend kept trying to talk him out of selling it to my dad. But the reason the guy ultimately sold it was because it was for me. And the guy seen I really, really wanted it. And his friend kept telling me he could get at least like 60 or 65, something like that. And so ended up getting that snake. Had him for about probably not even a year. And from reading Reptiles magazine all the time, and my favorite highlights were actually the breeding articles. Like, how they'd have like the breeder's highlight. And the breeder would talk about the species you're working with, how to keep it, how to breed it. Those were my favorite. And the funny thing is, like, even though I liked frogs, if there was a new reptiles magazine issue and it was like dart frogs, I was like, oh, not that interested in reading this. But if it was about any culibrid species, pythons and boas, or, I was always reading it. Especially, I remember they had one that was like late 90s and it was about Greeri, and I remember that one's very interesting to me, especially because of the specifications. The person was talking about how you had to get them like really cool, and he preferred brumadium at like temps in like the low 50s and for a longer period of time to get good breeding results. And so anyway, since I had been reading all these articles, I really wanted to breed hognose snakes. And I had I had a book on milk snakes that I got for my birthday because of my Eastern milk snake that I had. And it was care, and then it showed breeding, and it showed the babies hatching out. And I thought it'd be so cool to breed and hatch these babies. And then also just seeing ads in reptiles magazines for like, there's Pete Call and, with like, he had Azabek, what the heck were they called? But then he had the albinos. Anyway, I seen that there was like, people breeding these things and selling them. And I thought it was such an interesting, thing, especially, I was going to reptile shows. So, I was already immersed in it, but seeing that there's, magazines and these reptile shows, and there's this market where you could breed and sell animals, and, just do more than just keeping them, actually breed the animals, raise them. And then the whole genetics aspect, color morphs really interested me from a really early age, even though there wasn't really any morphs in hognose at that time. Like, I didn't know there were. It didn't take me long to figure out there was, like maybe a year into keeping hognose. But I soon got a female hognose for my male, and actually I bred them. And it was actually right before my 11th birthday. I got the female to lay eggs. And I didn't put an egg box with it. I bred them in 10-gallon aquariums, and I had heat rocks in there. And it's just like big aspen shavings. And I didn't have an egg box. I basically found the instructions and stuff that I'd like read on how to breed colubrids from Reptiles magazine. I remember my dad's coming home from work. I was like, Dad, my hognose laid 11 eggs. He's like, what? He's like, no, he's like, no, he goes, they're probably all bad. I said, no, they're white. They look good. And he comes in, he looks at me, he goes, oh, wow. He goes, do look good. And so I didn't know what to do at that point because I figured I wouldn't be able to breed them. And so anyway, he helps incubate them. And he just put them in like little deli cups with peat moss. And he put them on his dresser in his room. And only 3 hatched. I don't know if it was because a lot of them were dummy eggs or the setup wasn't the best. But I did hatch those babies. And then, from there on, I just wanted to get more. And the following breeding season, I remember I didn't have good luck. That female didn't breed. And then I got a second female, which actually was a Mexican hognose, which I was actually aware of because I couldn't, it's so hard to find Western hognose at that point. They're almost all wild caughts or captive hatch babies, and they're all coming from Richard Evans. And, this stuff was, being sent to probably many different shows, and they're being sold quickly. And so I got this adult Mexican female hognose, and she unfortunately died in cool down, and don't know what happened, just random drop dead.
Yeah.
Who knows? She's a wild caught and everything. She could have been sick, but she seemed fine. She had water and everything. And so then it wasn't until the year following that I bred a few more hognose. And then by the time I was like 15, I was producing 50 or 60 hognose a year.
That's awesome.
When was that? Was that like early 2000s, mid 2000s?
I got my first hognose in the very end of I think it was early 97.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, by the time 98 rolled around, I was already got my first clutch. And so by 2000, I have actually a book. I wish I would have kept going with it, but I think I started it in either 2000 or 2001, and it showed multiple breeding seasons up until 2004. And the list of my females, their pre-lay sheds to when they laid. So I started tracking their pre-lay sheds because I read that in a Reptiles magazine article in I think it was June 2000 from Richard Evans, and that was a very favorite Reptile magazine article of mine. Probably still my favorite Reptile magazine. Was
the cover of it green with a hognose snake in the front?
It was up close of a plain hognose baby head is on sandy soil background. It's just a wild type neonate.
I know the exact article.
Yeah,
it's in that closet right behind me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and so and that's where I actually first learned about how they shed their tongues, and so then that was a cool one, and I'd educate people about that, when I was young, like, because I always thought this stuff was interesting because like hognose snakes were so quirky compared to all these other species. And anyhow, from then on, I was pretty much just obsessed with, plains hognose specifically. I liked all heterodon. I remember I'd read everything. I wish I can't reference everything I'd come across. I remember reading the Platt study. I can't remember the first time. I was probably around maybe 19 or 20. And then there was also some other articles. And the one was, what was the one I wanted to trying to think? I had it and I lost it. But anyway, I'll continue. It might come back.
Yeah.
That's life.
Yeah.
I'll just keep going. Maybe
it'll probably come back. But yeah, so anyway, I was always interested in reading about them and also the ecology of them, where they come from. And so I would go on like reptile forums at the time. And then anytime anybody posted like, hey, I herped like Kansas or Texas, Minnesota, Illinois, I'd go through and scroll through it. And then if there wasn't anything with hognose, I'd be like, yeah. I was like, that's kind of cool other stuff. I was like, I'd look at it a little bit, but I'm like, yeah, I'm not like ultra like zeroed in on it. And so like, though that's pretty much just been my life, is just trying to learn more about them. I also really, really like genetics. So my first early thing was started selective line breeding. I learned a lot through, the potential of line breeding working with leopard geckos, because leopard geckos and species alike, like at that time, let's say bearded dragons, there was a lot of polygenic or just natural polymorphism among the species that you can, zero in on and then selectively line breed for that. Such as, leopard geckos are highly variable. Anybody that's a little familiar with them sees that these things are an awesome vector for selective line breeding for different phenotypes.
And that's where, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I remember your table being years ago, is very heavy leopard geckos. Am I wrong in my memory of this?
No, not at all. Well, the one thing, like, because we've just been talking about hognose, this whole entire time, there's another big, massive side story happening along the way. I started breeding geckos with my dad. As I was breeding hognose, I was also interested in, genetics. And the one thing that I seen were like leopard geckos, and I thought they were really pretty. I thought they were really cool. They made good pets. And there was a lot of morphs within them, and they were affordable. And that's the thing. When I was a kid, I'm buying like, wild caught and captive hatch hognose snakes for like $50 and $60. I can't really afford anything over $100. So I'm starting out my collection with that. And I would actually look for like any time, like I'd buy, once hognose were a little more available around the age of I was like 13, they started not selling out. People were starting to finally produce some, and you'd go to a show and there'd be like 4 or 5 available, and there'd still be maybe a couple at the end of the show. It wasn't like there's none available like before. And anyway, so I would look for interesting hognose snakes, and along the way I started breeding leopard geckos, and quickly into breeding leopard geckos. I hadn't even bred them yet, actually. I was getting ready to. I had like 6. My dad taking me all these shows and everything. At that point, he was actually only had like a small group of redfoot tortoises, and he had sold them actually all by the time I was like 9 years old. And so me actively going to all these shows, now we're like, into me breeding hognose a couple times, having a collection of like maybe 8-10 hognose, me being like 12 years old. And my dad's like, do you want to start breeding leopard geckos together? He's like, I actually have real money, not allowance money. We can buy cool stuff, and we can actually start breeding these and do some. And I was like, yeah, let's do that. And my dad's a pretty, I'll just say kind of like motivated person, and he gets really like, focused in on like a particular project, and that's where a lot of his time and effort goes into. And so by the time I was 15, so it's like only 3 years later, we already had a website, and we're also kind of like fairly known for breeding leopard geckos. And then we were also getting into African fat tail geckos. I really like them. And so my dad and I bred geckos together for a very long time, up until I was about like 24. And then he started doing corn snakes. He started doing his own side project. People would get confused with us all the time because we have the same name. People would know that I've been around for a while, but I look relatively young. I'm finally starting to get a lot of gray hair, so that actually helps. because then people don't think I don't look too young anymore. So people would a lot of times get confused because they'd be like, well, you know, they'd think that the Hognose were my dad's. And I'm like, no, actually, all the Hognose have always just been mine. And then some people now are asking me about the corns. Like, you guys, you have corns? I was like, never really had corns. I had a few as pets a few times, but the person you're talking about doing the Coral Ghost and all these projects, that's my dad.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
And then, so we have the same damn name. And so, it gets confusing.
Because I remember seeing, JMG line, just like you said, the Coral Ghost. I remember seeing that. And I remember so many geckos before that. Later, I remember hearing, JMG mentioned as far as Hognose. And I'm like, I thought they were leopard gecko people.
Yeah.
That's because that's what I was used to seeing, on the table there at Tinley.
Well, for a while, I made a living pretty much just off leopard and African fat-tailed geckos. And then, I was, in charge of sales and, internet stuff as well as taking care of them. And, my dad and I would do a lot of shows together. And, I was always producing like a couple hundred Hognose. And it wasn't until I was probably like 26 and I really reduced on geckos. And my dad and I weren't breeding geckos together at that point. My dad wanted to pursue his art stuff. The geckos and taking care of stuff was like, he just got tired of it. And it was a lot. And that's one thing I say, like leopard gecko breeding, especially if you're doing it on a large scale, it's very tedious. It's kind of like farming. And actually, I have too many leopard geckos as it is now. I got to really get them reduced. But hognose snakes, obviously there's a limit. You can get to have too many. I'm kind of
as he looks
yeah.
For those not watching, he's surrounded by them right now. So.
Yeah. And this isn't the only room. This is just one baby section.
Right.
But the one thing is too, like the one reason I produce a lot of Hognose is because I have so many ideas and I have so many projects and I like to have genetic diversity. And so more genetic diversity in the larger groups of projects I have, the more gene pools and the more, specimens I have to choose from to make the most ideal, pairings. But anyway, so that's it wasn't until I was like late 20s, like 27, 28, started really producing a lot of Hognose, 500-700 plus a year.
So we're about to really dive more into the Hognose, but curious right now, other than Hognose, what is it you're keeping and kind of working with? We'll call it on the side.
Beaded lizards are one a lot of people are aware of.
Very
They
cool.
follow me because they're venomous and they're cool looking. And so if somebody has like beaded, especially if they're I'll hold mine. They're it's not like holding like a cobra or something like that. They're a lot more manageable. It's like a potato with legs. And if you aim it away from you and you hold it like underneath, you pretty much can't get bit. Anyhow, so then I have the leopard geckos. I have some African fat-tailed geckos. I have a handful of Honduran milk snakes and a trio of Sumatran short-tailed pythons.
So where do they come in play? That seems way out of the realm of everything else that we've discussed.
Well, a little bit, but I like hognose snakes, so it's fair to assume I like robust short snakes.
Give me the little fatties. Yeah.
The thing no one knows about me is my favorite pythons are short tails.
I think you know what I would have had to have guessed that. Is why not. And you know what? Speaking of like short tails and this is actually kind of like off topic almost, but I see people do python hybrids, and hybrids to me, I feel like as long as somebody's disclosing it, it's like these animals aren't going back into the wild. People are aware of what they are. I'm not against them at all. I'm for them for a little bit. I think they learned some things about them, like especially when they did like the Woma ball python hybrid. I thought that was insane. I was like, I didn't think that was possible. I was like, Woma pythons don't even have heat pits, and you hybridize it with something that is evolved heat pits, and I was like, that's pretty crazy. At least to me, it seemed like from just superficially looking at them, like that's very interesting. So I really want somebody to hybridize an African rock python with a blood python, because it would be a terrifyingly cool hybrid to do this one time. I'd like to see how big
there
they
would
get.
be blood.
How wide they get, how defensive they are, how cool the labyrinth of patterns and colors are.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Okay. So at what point, how long would you say you've been doing, like, obviously Hognose are the focus, that's what you're known for. I can flat out tell you that literally yesterday I had somebody message me and say, you got to get Jeff Galewood on to talk about Hognose snakes. And I was like, he's coming on tomorrow. So you're known for this. At what point you started this when you were freaking 8 or 6 or something, which is nuts. What point were you? How long ago was it when you were like, all right, throttle down, hogs are it, I'm done. This is what's going to be the focus. Because that's one of the things that I respect. There's like the two approaches. There's the jack of all trades, master of some, and then there's the I'm going to go for it. I'm going to be the guy for something or the gal for something. And what I find interesting about you, Jeff, is that you did leopard geckos and hognose snakes, which aren't really, they're both mainstays in herpetoculture today, but their care is very different. So you're kind of like the hybrid of the two, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But when were you like, I'm doing leopard geckos, but hogs, that's it? Like, was it just literally, I like these things, that's why I'm doing it? Or was it?
It was pretty much, it was pretty much that, by my mid-20s, I kind of was like gearing and going towards that. A lot of the issue was just time and space. Leopard geckos and African fat tail geckos are actually supplementing my income and actually giving me money to invest in hognose, and then also pay the bills and everything. And so the thing is too is like I was always pretty logical and frugal with saving money, and when I had enough saved up and I'm like, well, money's not like I could probably go like a couple of years without working, and I had morphs of hognose, I'm like, I'd rather just work with hognose my whole life. They're by far my favorite species. I like a lot of other species. I really love beaded lizards. If beaded lizards weren't venomous, I think they'd be like one of the most popular species of pet lizard. But even so, it doesn't matter what it is. Like, people have asked me, if the hognose market, let's say it goes down and my income drops like 90%, I'm staying with hognose. It's always going to be hognose. So the thing is, though, leopard geckos taught me a lot about many things. Market psychology, just the psychology of, interacting with people. I mean, you can get that from any type of reptile breeding while selling to people. But I also seen it with selective line breeding, people's opinions on topics. And I've actually seen it repeated many times through my history. I'm like, okay, this is the exact same things happening. I'm like, I'm not new to this, but the people that it's currently happening with and the people observing it, clearly it kind of is, because nobody's really noticing it. Or some people might be, but they're just not going to point it out, because you can't just be rude all the time and start arguments, because that's what Facebook was made for.
I was going to say, that's social media. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what Facebook is made for, and I'm not on Facebook all the time. So anyway, but then I learned a lot about quarantine and disease from leopard geckos. I learned a lot, and so I take a lot of that into hognose snakes, and it prepared me for a lot. And but still learning all the time, never ending pursuit of more information. Whether it's helpful or just for a better understanding. I mean, having a better understanding, though, is, of course, helpful. The hognose were my favorite all the time. Leopard geckos, I really like them, but it's just not my favorite species. So that's why it's hognose. Okay.
So I have a couple more questions. We normally kind of do the deep dive of husbandry, and we're going to do husbandry, but given your history with hogs, I think the listeners, especially the hognose oriented listeners, would love to hear about the origin of some of the morphs that you are responsible for. I know that's what I'm super interested in.
Okay. That's always one of my favorite parts, is where this came from and the story behind it.
With the husbandry, I kind of want to do a little bit, not necessarily a rapid fire, but I do like getting, especially people that are well established, to kind of just put out their bare bone numbers, if you know what I'm saying. So one question I have is temperature wise, how do you heat your animals? Are you an ambient heat the room kind of guy, or do you have heat tape on the racks, or and then what are the temperatures you're holding your animals at during the maintenance time of year, when basically they're out of brumation and then we're going into brumation? What temps do you drop them down to? So just, if you don't mind, going over the whole temperature piece of the thermal husbandry for your hognose snakes.
I do both. I have ambient and heat tape. There are times where I just rely only on ambient. It's when I'm bringing females out of cool down and I'm pairing them at first. And a lot of my males I'll keep at ambient for the whole breeding season. And sometimes even after, but I'm generally always using, under tank heating pads or heat cords if it's on my vision racks. I mainly have my favorite racks are my ARS because I get the polycarbonate clear tubs. My hot spots, that's one where people you see people online, they're they're asking, what's the correct temperature? And obviously, since they thermoregulate, there isn't an exact right answer. There's a right spectrum of an answer.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that.
100%.
So, yeah, so I, typically I'm keeping my rooms, the funny thing is I'll let my room temperatures drop in the winter. I'll let my room temperatures rise a little bit in the summer. Typically, I'm keeping my rooms minimum 75 ambient.
Okay.
Right now, the ambient's 79, 80. I do that a lot of times. I actually incubate my eggs right on a wire shelf. I don't even have incubators. There's a few reasons for that. Since the room's the incubator, I can walk right in. Also, hognose eggs aren't experiencing the high temps of let's say a consistent 82 as they do in the wild. In the wild, they're experiencing nighttime drops, and hognose plains eggs are taking around 90, sometimes 100 days, roughly. I don't have exact numbers on that, but knowing when they are roughly laid and when people are finding them, observing them coming out, they're taking around 90 to 100 days to hatch. And that makes sense because they're getting nighttime drops around 70 degrees, and during the day, they're getting upper 70s, low 80s. So I'll let my temperatures fluctuate a bit, and a lot of times I'll keep them on my rack that's in the right around 79, 80. If it's during the summer and I wake up to 82, that's fine. But generally, I have this thermostat where it kicks on if it gets too hot, and the air conditioner kicks on, and if it gets too cool, my furnace kicks on at that point. And the hot spots for my babies is anywhere between 88 and 94. And I always bump it up when they're not feeding. Or let's say I have some poor feeders. If I raise the temperature 8, 10 degrees, you always get a few more the next, go through that are more inclined to eat because they have that metabolic rise.
And that statement is something that I guess I want to pause on for a minute because it's going to venture further than just hognose. And that is when given temperatures, everyone has to understand there's always a range of temperatures. Yep. You just gave that, but also the individuals within the species are going to have their preferences too. This is a temp that works generally for a set species, but just like us, I want it as cold as possible in my bedroom when I'm sleeping. My wife is happy with it being a inferno in that room. And so there's this constant battle. I need 2 fans on me and all that. But my whole point is that, where you said you have all these, that are eating, you bump that up 2 or 3 degrees, and then suddenly there's this other group that starts eating. So everyone keep that in mind that because inevitably, I'm sure every one of us have gotten these messages of my snake won't eat and my habitat's fine. No, I don't want to know that it's, right within the parameters that are, the care sheet says what exactly are your temps right now, because I'm going to tell you to bump it one way or the other based off what you tell me and off what you tell me the snake's doing. Just because it's within those parameters doesn't mean it's what that snake wants in the environment you have it in. So I just thought that was a great point to kind of just take and expand for a minute for everyone listening, no matter what species you're working with. Listen to the snake, pay attention to what it's doing and try something, a little bit one way or the other and see if that changes behavior. So great point, Jeff.
That's well said, Clint, because that's where I've learned a lot of this stuff is actually just from paying attention to the hognose. Having a lack of success for 8 or 10. If you're having a lack of success for let's say 8, 10 years, or you start having issues, they're telling you something. If you notice, and then other things too is we're talking about, we're going to go into their, wild plains hognose snakes, and the one thing you can take away from them right away is these things are breeding at way smaller sizes they do in captivity. So the one thing is I don't really have many large female hognose. So I feed mine, I'd say probably in closer proximity to how they eat in the wild. My females, once they have gained all their weight, I'll kill their food. I take them off of it for a few weeks, and sometimes I'll feed females every 2.5 weeks. I don't want to see exponential, real quick growth. And the one thing is, you know, a lot of that's controlled by temperature. You know, in the wild, these things are experiencing, you know, consistent, good, you know, climates to digest meals. And then there's times where there's cold fronts. And then there's also times where there's droughts, and they're probably not going to be really out looking for food at that point because it's going to be too tough to search for it. So anyway, you know, the one thing I've learned from them, you know, and it's a lot of species. I feel like that happens like that's happened like across the board with a lot of reptile keepers. They're like boas. Oh, you know, raise them more slowly. Like talking about like, you know, boa constrictors. You know, these females are breeding more at like around 5 feet, and you know they're keeping them like more lean, and they're not like slamming them with food, and they're having much higher fertility rates. Now their litters aren't as big, but they're having more consistent, you know, fertile litters.
Right.
One neat thing about hogs is most of the studies done in the wild with plains hogs actually show that they do this behavior called estivation, where we think that they come up in April or May, and then they're active the whole year. Now, plains hognose snakes, before I go further, they go from freaking Alberta all the way down to Texas. They have a massive range. So I'm not talking like I'm talking about specific populations that have been studied, but there's several that they basically have 2 periods of activity during the year. They're active from like April through the end of June. Then July comes and it becomes a freaking insane hot inferno where they live. They go underground. The telemetry work shows they're not really active on the surface. And then you get to like August, September. This is where Hogtober comes from. And then you get this second period of activity, but they got to make up the calories that they didn't get during the main part of the summer. But when it gets super, super hot with some of these populations, they're just not active. So this whole idea of they come up out of hibernation after you brumate them, and then you give them a mouse once a week, every week for like 20, 30 weeks, that's really probably not the best thing.
It's not good for
them at all. So, you know, putting in there planned, it's sometimes referred to as planned deprivation, or there's another word for it, controlled deprivation. That's it, which sounds horrible. But at the same time, that's actually exactly what estivation is. Like when you're, and these animals have to make this call because if they're slithering around. One of the things that I've really enjoyed, I said this at Colubrid Fest, actually. I went off on a little tangent about how much I love dirt. I've become a complete dirt nerd when I go out and look for these things, and I'm temping the ground where I know the hogs live. And like on these sand prairies where these animals live on a July day, the air temperature is like 74 degrees and pleasant at 9:30 or 10 in the morning. And then you zap the ground with your temp gun, and it's 125 freaking degrees. Yeah. So, you know, that's going to massively impact the activity of these animals. They're out at noon. They're dead. Like they can't. They have to choose microclimates, their microhabitats where they're not going to be exposed. So,
right,
exactly. Then they're
there's way more to this stuff than we realize, and that's what I think just makes keeping these things so. They're just fascinating little beasties. That's all.
And I tell you, that's one of the things that when it comes to this species in general, as often as we, you know, whether it's on the show or off, you know, that you and I have talked about them, Zach, and it's the first species that I personally, and I barely have any. The hognose I have, you sent me, Zach.
Yeah.
And it's because I don't want to go up against guys like this, you know, when it comes to hognose. So, but it's the first species that I have got to regularly hear scientific studies and updates on, and these observations from the field with such degree. And then, you know, I went and when talking to Jeff on his show, getting to hear some of the things he noticed, you know, in the wild, talking about some of the things with the head structure that we discussed, you know, Jeff, and it's fascinating to me because in a species that at this point in the colubrid market, we've already established is over just over a third of the entire colubrid market right now is hognose. And with it being so popular, so many people having them, so many people loving them, to hear of so much that is still being learned
about them
is amazing. And it just, I mean, how much more is there, you know, that to figure out on so many other animals? So it's really been fascinating to listen to both of you in our conversations on them, because it's really, I mean, it tells us, man, we've still just scratched the surface on so much of this. Yeah, we've figured out how to keep them, you know, in these four walls, so to speak, but there's still so much better we're able to continue to do with what we learn, you know, from their natural behavior.
No, sure.
So it's neat stuff.
So with the temperatures, then, what temps are you dropping them down for breeding? What does that like? We're recording this in October. Are you starting that process now?
Well, no, you can like. Well,
no?
I have some in brumation now that I'm about ready to take out. You know, if you simulate a brumation period, you can breed them relatively any time of the year. So you know, I'll brumate them for like 2 to 3 months. That's generally my average time. Males, you don't have to brumate as long. But anyway, and I'll brumate, like right now, my brumation temps, I really try to hit the, mid 50s, which is like, the average overall temperature. If you go like 5 feet down the ground, that's, where it stays at. So that's like my optimal, goal. But, I've also had really good breeding years where I've cooled them and they're ping ponging between like 60 to 67. And I've had equally good seasons doing that and just keep them dark. And as long as you simulate, a brumation period, they seem to respond to it naturally very well, being warmed up and then paired. And, so yeah, that's pretty much all I do for temperatures when it comes to brumation. And again, brumation for me, I do it all the time. I pretty much always have something in brumation.
That's really interesting. That's cool.
It's neat.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So there's your thermal stuff. When it comes to your actual bins, your tubs that you're keeping your animals in, what sizes are the boys, adult males, adult females going in? And then what is your preferred substrate type?
Well, yeah, I've tried like many substrates over the years. That's the one thing I always try different stuff, because some people even see me like incubating my eggs and they're like, hey, that's not how you say you incubate your eggs. I'm like, I'm always doing different stuff. Don't pay attention to like everything I'm doing, because you're going to see all kinds of weird stuff. But I've tried, I've used coco coir mixed with sand. I used to do that a long time ago, and I'd mix clay into it, basically replicating loam, because loam is silt, sand, and clay all mixed together, essentially. So I'd make loamy substrates. I still do that. I make their egg boxes either all coco coir or coco coir sand. I like to kind of replicate that loam-like consistency. And then, I've tried every type of wood chip. And the thing is, with using rack systems like these, even though I like to have them open and I like to have a lot of good airflow, because I really like air circulation, the coco coir and the sand dries out. You got to add water. And then when they poop in it, it's harder to spot clean. So it's not my favorite. So when you have a lot, I found coarse aspen sandy chips work really well. And the funny thing is that the coarse aspen sandy chips are very uncommon. And I got this trend going where a lot of other people are started using it. And everybody asks me, where do you get it from? And it's my least favorite question, because it's like, I get it from a specific feed mill, and you have to find, a feed mill that carries it for you. I was like, you can't get it from my place. I was like, they don't ship, for one. But so anyway, it's not like it's a good question, but you have to really find a feed mill or buy it, from a source that stocks it. But I've tried maple. I've tried the regular sandy chips. I used to use that. The aspen shavings. And then one time, I was probably around like 20 years old, and Mr. Feed had coarse aspen sandy chips on the list. And I was like, I'm going to try, because I try everything that they get in. I've tried, the compressed wood pellets. I've tried a lot of stuff. And so anyway, I got the coarse aspen sandy chips, and I used it. I remember that I went back to some other ones, and I used the compressed wood. And then I kept coming back to the coarse aspen sandy chips. There's things I liked about it. Actually, I made a short YouTube video talking about my favorite substrates for hognose, and coarse aspen sandy chips. If you are going to go to like a wood type bedding, is my favorite. If they ingest it, it's safe, small pieces. It's very hard for them to ingest since it's bigger, corkier, lighter pieces.
Nice.
A lot of times it gets stuck on a mice. By the time it gets to the edge of their mouth, it flakes off. If they dump water into it, like let's say spill over the water bowl, fine sandy chips just pack down and they really hold it. The coarse, since it's like more kind of like corky and airy, it actually kind of dries out a little easier, and it doesn't mold as much or mold as quickly. And it still does the same kind of thing when they lay, stool in it. If they poop, it kind of clumps it a bit. You got to spot clean it anyway. And then it just doesn't get everywhere. It doesn't get stuck on their hemipenes. It doesn't get stuck in the edge of their mouth like fine sandy chips. So yeah, I really like the coarse aspen sandy chips. I mean, I don't think it's like the absolute most perfect bedding, but it's close to it. And if you have to frequently keep your animals clean and you have a bunch of them, I like coarse aspen sandy chips.
There we go. Okay, and then final question, which we'll just go where it goes. So getting husbandry wise, the babies.
Okay.
We at the university we produce just normals and hets and things like that, and I finally picked up just a couple morph projects for me because I'm finding that I actually like them. But we have produced a couple hundred hogs the past couple years, and I've noticed that I get about like 60% of them will just eat. And then there's that 40% where it's like, Jesus Christ, here we go. And we're dipping things in tuna, dipping things in frog juice, dipping things in reptilings, getting out like the salmon, like all that stuff. What is your main go-to? Like, you've got a baby, it didn't eat the first go around. This is like the question everybody wants to know. What does the process look like for Jeff to figure out what the hell the little guy wants to eat to get it going?
Yeah, well, the thing is, like I tell everybody, it's like as long as the baby hognose is healthy, and this is just explaining it how I'd explain to like anybody that's new, it's asked about hognose, or some people are like, hey, these things don't want to eat, and it's like it's not that those people are wrong, they're just kind of wording it, in my opinion, like a little like the way to word it is like all baby hognose, as long as they're healthy, want to eat. It's all a matter of finding the presentation and the method that initiates this feeding response. So when you're offering them a pinky mouse and they're not eating it, obviously they're not identifying it, as prey. And so the go-to things are like, I really like chicken bone broth, sardine juice because it's really potent. But typically I'm not doing that by the second feeding anymore. I actually kind of am doing that a little more, like sooner than I normally would, because there's this misconception like if a hognose eats scented, that's bad, and that's going to show up somehow later in its life. Like, hey, this was once a scented feeder, and it's like not true at all. Like a lot of times when I have scented feeders, within 3 feedings, they don't even need it anymore, because you're starting to get that routine, and they're building up what I call hognose confidence, where they know what's coming, they know the approach, and like once a hognose feeds like 8-10 times. If you have a rack that's been fed 8-10 times, by the time you get to the 10th feeding, and like the majority are strong feeders, a lot of them are no longer really that cautious of you. They associate you with food. Sometimes even they come out with a little bit of curiosity because they know that you potentially have food, or they know you're a signal for food. But the one thing is, I think having a stealthy approach, which could be very difficult. And what I like to do is I like to have the pinky face torn, squeeze the brains a little bit, dipped in water, and I try to like kind of swoop it in. Sometimes I'll even open the tub. So I'm moving the hognose towards the pinky, and I'm not moving my hands towards it. So I make it like they're going towards it. Yeah. I try to get it right against their mouth, and I want them to drink it. Because as soon as you get them drinking from it, you're getting them to calm down and focus on one action, and that's drinking. And they're drinking, so they're now consuming. And as they're consuming, that flavor is passing probably over their olfactory. And a lot of times they're like, hey, this is prey. This tastes good, and I'm eating it. And then you can use that same method with a whole slew of scents. And, but there's all kinds of things. Like the first success I've ever had with, this is actually an interesting story. I got an albino hognose from Ian Giandowski Outback Reptiles for like $100 or $150. I was buying some from him, and he had this one albino in the group, and it was really small. This thing was probably 3 or 4 grams. And he goes, "This is never eaten," and he goes, "It's $100. It either is 100 or 150." And he goes, "But if it dies, I don't want to hear anything about it." Come back to his room. He goes, "I don't want to hear anything crying about it." He goes, "Buy it. If it dies, that's it." He goes, "But it doesn't eat. It hasn't gotten to eat." So I was like, okay. And for whatever reason, I think it's because I liked hognose so much. And even though I was like, I think I was 16 at the time. So I said 15. I'm pretty sure I was 16. But anyway, I bought the snake, and I got it home, and I tried feeding it, my normal methods, and it wouldn't eat. And I don't know why, if I had read an article at that time, but I did know that they'd eat baby lizards. And so I had some really small leopard geckos that hatched, and I gave it one of those, and the thing clobbered it. And so then, 6 months later, this albino hognose is like this big. So It ate the leopard gecko, and then I had one that was deformed. I kept it frozen, and I was using that for scenting. And then within like 4 or 5 feedings, this hognose that wouldn't eat was like smashing frozen thawed mice.
Mhm.
And so then by like 6 months later, like I had this albino female hognose like this big, and it's worth like $1,500, and I was all pleased with myself because I got it for like $150 or whatever it was. But the thing is, even though you get really good at like feeding hognose, I mean, I still have tough times with ones. Like you'll see these colored tags, like that one there hasn't eaten yet. And so I've assist fed that one a few times, but I don't have any little live geckos at the moment. But that's the one thing I've noticed. If you have a hognose that absolutely won't eat anything, like you've tried live pinky. I've had one over here. I tried a live pinky on it, wouldn't take it. I was like, I bet this will work. And it was kind of like a gray banded king snake dude kind of like thing. So Clint, you'll like this one. You actually talked about something like this. Like I took a sliver of toad and I put it on top of the live pinky and I rubbed it on this the innards of the toad, put it in there, and it took it. So, and that's the thing too. Like I have baby hognose that will sometimes prefer live pinky mice. That's a big one I do. If they don't eat a few times, I'll throw live pinkies in there. And a good portion of those eat them. But yeah, if it comes down to it, my big thing is just torn head dipped in water with guts, pushed out. If it doesn't take that, then I'm doing chicken bone broth, sardine, toad, or lizard. Lizard works again very well. And then sometimes I'll even apply that to a live mouse. And another thing you do, Clint, we talked about this, is make hognose soup or whatever you're talking about soup. And you take all the things you want to scent with, make the most disgusting slurry you can. Yes. Put it in clay cups, you have it for later, and then dip it in there. And usually they like it. But I've tried so many things for hognose because since like real potent things work, I thought this one was going to work. I may have talked about this one last time. I don't think I did. But the fermented fish that's really nasty, like it's like the cans, like we break it, like when you cut it open, it like squirts out. So I got the fermented Swedish fish, and this stuff reeked like dead fish and farts. And and amazing. So it is. And I'll tell you what, I never seen flies like something so much. If you want fly extractant ever, get that stuff. Because I left it outside, and then it was like bazillions of flies trying to get this stuff. It like attracted like every fly in the neighborhood. And so I had that juice, and the reason I ended up leaving the rest of it like outside, so for one, it made my freezer stink, and then also the hognose didn't care for it. I dipped the pinkies in. Here's the thing: they drink the fluid off of it. They wouldn't even flinch. They wouldn't even react. To them, it looked like they're just drinking water. I was like, man, these things don't give a crap about this stuff. They weren't like grossed out by it. They weren't intrigued by it. It was like really neutral. So I'm like, oh, this stuff doesn't work.
Man,
That's wild.
Found tuna to work really well. I have 2.2 Southern hogs right now here at the house. Cool. And the Simus, they will not. They're funny. They have, just like you said, they actually, strong association. I open up their tubs. They're from Kevin Fisher. And they come up. If the fuzzy has been dipped in tuna water, I just keep a bag of it frozen in the freezer. They pound them right away. I've been trying to wean them off of the tuna water, and I can get 2 of them to eat them without it. One of them will eat it occasionally, and one of them's like, nope, not even touching it. Put the tuna on there. The second the tuna hits it, that male just pulverizes. So that's been our kind of go-to this year.
Nice.
But I know exactly what you're talking about when the pinky or fuzzy or whatever is covered in the liquid and they do that drinking thing. Yes. I also have a bunch of king snakes that I've tried to scent, and the kings, they don't do that. False water cobras will do the same thing. To get my false water cobras, I have to do the frog slurry. False water cobras and hognose, in my experience, it's just false water cobras are like 10 times the size of a hog, but the babies are very much the same, except for they want to kill you and the hogs don't. So
okay. Now, the book you're writing that's encompassing Simus too, right?
What was that?
You're doing Simus into your book as well.
Oh yeah, the whole genus.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm sure you probably agree. Heterodon Simus is, I think, even though it's not my favorite, it'd be my second favorite to play. I'd probably, Mexican is so similar, but I'd probably have to put plain, Southern, then Mexican. But Southerns are very intriguing because they are by far the most reclusive and the hardest to find, and they have to radio track them if you want to find them. And the only time I ever see anybody coming across them is like dumb luck or you are road cruising, and
they are almost certainly going to get federally listed in the next decade.
Okay.
Fire ants have just devastated southern hognose snakes, and then they're a habitat specialist to longleaf pine ecosystems, and longleaf pine ecosystems are where people like to build houses. So
sure,
that whole indigo snake, pine snake, southern hognose snake dynamic. So they're definitely not doing well. But I decided that there were lines that were captive born. They are not cheap. Holy hell. But while prior to them being listed, and if I was doing the book, I was like, I got to keep them all, and they're fun. They're also, fun fact, the most closely related hogs to the westerns, which is pretty cool. So Mexicans and westerns, there's some science I can't talk about, but I'm privy to it, and we'll be talking about it sometime in the next year. So I know everybody's saying, those are related. They're definitely related. But if you take the Mexican and the westerns out of the equation, Thymus and Nassicus shared a common ancestor, and Platyrhynus, the eastern one, it shared a common ancestor its ancestor is extinct. So they're all in the same genus, but they are definitely two different lineages, which is pretty cool.
That's interesting because, if you look at a southern and a plains, they do look very similar with the head structure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, cool. Okay. So
I think are we ready to move to?
Yep.
That's where I was hoping to, because it's like here's a part. What I love is we're about to talk about a few morphs.
Yeah.
And while morphs are cool to look at, what I love that we get to do sometimes on the show is get to hear the story behind the morph. Yes. I mean, because it gets lost too often in herpetoculture, where something came from, how it came to be, the first time it was seen, that type of piece. So I'd like to move into that now. And totally. I think is the first one we're going to talk about the Arctic. Is that right?
Max,
all right.
Can you bring that up, bud? So we have Max behind the scenes. So that the two troglodyte old peeps don't screw this up.
And as a reminder to everyone, Max is short for maximum effort, because that's what that guy gives all the time.
True that. So if you live under a rock or aren't a hognose person, Jeff is responsible for quite a few morphs. And there's two, I don't know if they're pattern, I don't know what exactly we would call them, but there's condas and there's Arctics. And I know Arctics, that's definitely you. So once we get this picture up, and I think I just added it. There we go. Now this is a super Arctic because I couldn't find a picture of just an Arctic. So if you're, looking on YouTube, you can see it. If you're riding in your car, go to YouTube, you can see it. But can you just walk us through how this came to be and when it came to be and all that kind of goodness as far as the Arctic mutation?
Sure. Well, the Arctic is an incomplete dominant trait, as most people know. And I actually acquired it pretty early on, but my first original Arctic was bred into my lemon ghost. My first original, at that time, it was bred into the beginning of my lemon ghost project. At that point, I didn't even coin the lemon ghost name at that point. But anyway, the initial Arctic I picked up was peculiar looking and very pretty. Had a really nice white soft background, nice sharp contrast, and I was like, I gotta have that hognose. And she was bred into my original lemon ghost male, and that actually continued through my lemon ghost project until I started getting these Arctics to surface. Mm-hmm. And I named them that, or I coined that name right away because of just this nice white and sharp appearance that some of them had. And so those ones I'd always when I produced them, I kept them separate. And I'd say early on, I probably accidentally did sell a couple lower key ones that nobody later ended up breeding, way back then. But it wasn't until, I was in my early 20s where I had produced some and I kept them separate, and I finally paired some together. Or actually, first time I paired, I bred an Arctic back to a mom that was a lemon ghost lineage animal. but had, you know, a unique look. And she produced actually this boy, and this boy was like white with green on him, and he is really insane looking. And I'm like, okay, and that's, you know, he is, you know, part of my Arctic project. He's like one that I just, you know, I classified as an Arctic, bred him back, and produced the first super Arctic. And you know, the thing was, like, when I had Arctic and I was pairing it, it acted like incomplete dominant. But I did the dumb thing as somebody in my late teens at that time, listened to other people, and there was people back then saying like, oh, you can't have like a dominant trait in colourbreds. No, that's like impossible. You know, the odds of that, blah blah blah, this and that, and you know, and then at that time too, they're calling incomplete dominant co-dominant.
Right.
And you know, people, a lot of people, like, I'd say, you know, knew the difference, but you just go along with it because 99% of people knew it as co-dominant, and if you said incomplete dominant, they get all confused, and then also it didn't sound as good as co-dominant. And so anyway. Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous.
He's right. I literally had this conversation on the ride home from Tinley.
Oh, did you?
Anna was kind of questioning me on some different genetics pieces because, you know, as strong as she is on so much, with her doing shows by herself, you know, now she wants to continue getting better and stronger. And when you're, you know, if you're at Metazotics table, you're known for colubrids. You've got to have a little bit more, you know, understanding of the different genetics involved. So we're having that conversation, and I literally had that point where it's technically incomplete dominant, but the world of reptiles is going to call it co-dominant. So if you say incomplete dominant, you're going to confuse somebody. So, but I'm explaining it to you the proper way, even though that's not really how you're going to explain it to everybody else. So you are 100% right, Jeff.
Yeah. Well, then the problem with that one too is, like, if you like, because I stopped saying co-dominant quite a while ago, and I did but the problem is, like, sometimes I would say it, and then there'd be somebody that knew a decent amount about genetics, and then they'd correct me, and then I'd be like, oh, this person doesn't think I know what I'm talking about now. This sucks. And so, you know, and then I'd have to explain to them, no, I understand, and this and that, and then a couple of times, like, I don't think the people believe me. So I was like, I gotta stop even saying it altogether, and just go with incomplete dominant. It's pretty adapted. Like in Hognose, it's, you know, well adopted, but yeah, I still hear it from time to time, especially with people with like ball pythons or other species. But since Hognose, there's only a couple incomplete dominant traits, Arctic and Anaconda. Skullface is one too, but there hasn't been proven there's a super, but I know there's a super, and that's kind of, it's a weird one. But anyway, going back to Arctic, we can go more into Skullface if you want, but that's going to be a rant and a half. But Arctic is, so anyway, I acquired one. It got bred into my original, founding lemon ghost male. It got bred, those offspring then got bred back into other animals that were founders of the lemon ghost project as I'm developing this yellow line. And then throughout this, I started popping up ones with the Arctic phenotype, kept them separate. And it wasn't until years later, finally bred some together, especially when I bred an Arctic to a normal one point, and I got like 50-50. And I'm like, this really looks like an incomplete dominant. And so anyhow, I ended up breeding them back, got the first super Arctic. And at that point, you know, confirmed like, hey, this is the homozygous, and was pretty blown away because the first one that hatched is, well, anybody that's hatched out super Arctics or is, you know, worked with them when they first hatched, they're primarily very hypermelanistic, and it isn't until their first growth shed that their background lightens up a lot, and you get these striking white and black animals. You know, with the solid black eyes and the translucent throats, and sometimes they get the like purple partial translucent scales along their sides. And yeah, and it was an amazing snake, and I was very lucky to be able to be in the position to acquire it, and, you know, really made my day because it is my favorite species, and so I'm very happy that I got to experience this.
So what year was that?
Oh, geez. Well, I got my first Arctic, like, you know, if there's okay, that's one of my, I think that's one of my older super. Yeah, it looks like one of my older super Arctic females. And that picture is probably from like, I feel like 2011 or 12. My first Arctic I acquired would have been right around when I was like 13 years old. So this would have been like 2003.
My God.
And yeah, and it wasn't really, I didn't produce a super until 2009. So yeah, it was a little bit of time before I actually bred some, you know, back to each other.
So you produced this mainstay morph of the third most popular snake.
Yes.
And you were 14 or 15?
When I bought the first one, yeah, and I collected it because it was really pretty, and I thought like,
who does that, Jeff?
well,
That's incredible.
Right place, right time, right attitude from reading Reptiles magazine, and I was very keen on looking for unusual looking wild type hognose because I didn't have the money to buy morphs quite at that time. And my cousin Thomas was actually breeding ball pythons, and he worked for Mark and Kim Bell at the time, and he would actually kind of do something similar. He was picking out normal ball pythons and weird ones, really weird ones from imports, and trying to find a new morph. And he actually is like the second person to have cinnamons. So that was kind of like a fun thing, especially because with leopard geckos I was doing the same thing, looking for really interesting, pretty animals. When I picked out that first Arctic, I didn't think like, oh, this is going to be a new trait. I thought this was a polygenic variation, or at that time, I thought something you could line breed. I don't think I knew the term polygenic really at that time. I guess I probably did from reading like leopard gecko books, but I wasn't actively using that term. So
for the people that are listening that aren't necessarily morph people, because this has always been something that I've dealt with, when you say super in genetic speech, what does that mean?
Well, super is jargon in herpetoculture to describe a homozygous animal that's an incomplete dominant or dominant gene. So if you got a pinstripe ball python, pinstripe's dominant because it's fully expressed in its single copy form, the heterozygous form, and it doesn't differ from the homozygous form. So this is explaining to people back home. And so a homozygous pinstripe would be considered a super pinstripe. But yeah, it's basically jargon, and I've seen geneticists come into the reptile hobby before that are kind of like newer. And the one guy I remember, he was like, "What the f is all this shit?" He's like, people are calling homozygous animals super, they're calling incomplete dominant co-dominant stuff, and this guy was just like having like a brain aneurysm because he was a geneticist and biologist, and he had just entered the realm of reptile breeding. And actually, I think he didn't even respond to mine because I kind of calmly explained to him, I'm like, well, in any, hobby you get into or any field you get into, there's going to be jargon. I mean, that's like how a lot of things like words come about, semantics, words are always changing. And yeah, so the super form, I still like those terms, especially because it keeps things easy for new people entering.
Yes.
And it's fun and it's interesting versus saying this is a homozygous. As soon as you say the word homozygous, somebody's going to think you have to be like a genius to understand what it means. But, once you kind of start understanding basic genetics, if you want to get more into it, then it starts to all make sense.
So, forgive me, guys, because I'm like 4 or 5 times I've tried to ask this, and that's when I finally realized my mic wasn't working.
I said,
because I'm sitting here, I'm like, why the hell aren't these guys talking to me?
Yeah.
So, forgive me, but so that first Arctic, you acquired it. I heard you say that, but was it from a show? Was it from an individual? Was it just
from a show? And this guy, I would say they're definitely wild caught lineage, like offsprings. The parents, I would assume, especially for that time, and knowing what that guy, I remember he had hognose a few times, and he was a heavier set fellow, and I'll probably never know who he is. I never seen him at reptile shows probably much after that. And that was, 24 years ago. So who knows? But I think those were, from a specific locale, especially looking at them. I would say, I don't want to say the locale because, you're not really, this is from way back before. And I didn't know at that time. No, but anyway, yeah, it was real clean and pretty. And I remember there's some other dude there wanted to buy it. And I knew him, and he was actually pissed at me that I bought it. Because he goes, I was going to go and buy that. And he called me a juvenile delinquent. And he was irritated. And I remember him, that was like verbatim. He called me a juvenile delinquent. Because I think he wanted to call me a name, but, I'm just like a young, innocent kid. So, that's the best he had.
Was this the Columbus show?
That would have been... I'm pretty sure that was Columbus. It wasn't.
My mind's blowing right now. So you bought the first Arctic in the year 2000 at the Columbus show. And that's when I was going to the Columbus show. So there's a chance that we were in the same room when you bought this thing.
Probably. Yeah, I don't
Full
think it
circle.
was. I don't
This
think
is
it was at
crazy.
Noah. It was either Noah or is the Columbus. I know. I can't remember for sure. It probably was that one, but I was going to Noah more frequently because that was closer to my house. I wasn't able to go there, but it was either one of those two. I feel like it was at the Armory. I'm not positive though. But yeah, because he had some other ones that looked like siblings, but they didn't have the same color. So I picked that one out. And yeah, at that time, that was when there was still a lot of wild caught, captive hatch or first generation captives from wild caught parents, and there's that's Richard Evans had the hypo pop up in his collection. Yep. Somebody found the albino in the PPA and traded it to him. At the PPA story, you'd have to ask Kevin Rhodes about it. I can never remember it, or Richard Evans himself. For some reason, that story I never remember. But then you have years later, David Turcotte is working with corn snakes. Once they get into hognose snakes, buys a pair of baby normals from a group of babies, so they're all from the same clutch, and breeds those together. Produces the first lavender. Dan Eby finds a hognose, and then a couple of years later in Montana, keeps that hognose. A couple years later, has to take a piss, so he goes to pee in this spot, and he sees a hognose, catches it, ends up keeping that one, breeds it to that female, produces a sable, proceeds to catch 3 more hognose in that same vicinity, around that same pond in Montana, breed all those, and none of those are even a het sable. So got lucky with those first 2. Then the anaconda, that story, I keep forgetting to ask that one dude. I know the story of what's supposed to be. I remember the story that is told and what's supposed to be the true story. So, the true story is a little weird. It's a little I got to ask that guy. Is that really true? Did he really buy it from you for $2,500? Because it's oddly specific. So it sounds like it's true. And so, there's a lot of funny things with I'd say pretty much everybody that has a new hognose morph has just been lucky. Everybody with a new hognose morph is lucky, or they're picking out really pretty babies and pretty stuff, and then they're also getting lucky.
Cool. Well, can we jump into Lemon Ghost?
Of course. Yeah.
Right.
So Lemon Ghost. Yeah.
We have a picture of your founding animal here.
Yes.
I believe.
I'm so happy I found this picture of this dude. Now, the only thing that kind of pains my heart a little bit is I don't have any older photos that I know of him. So this photo is 2004, and he's already kind of an oldish man here. He's at least 10 to 12 years old, I would presume, because I got him and he is an adult, and he had scars on him. So, and I remember the guy saying he got him when he was smaller, and this was at a time, too, again, where it'd be very hard to have a captive-born one, and noticing he has scars and his overall look, I highly doubt he is captive-born. So I presume when I got him, he was probably around 4 or 5 years old, since he was a smaller male when he got him. Maybe only been a couple years old. And so in this picture here, he would be, around maybe 11, 12 years of age. And he's actually my founder, Lemon Ghost. And he's my very first hognose, too. I don't think I ever named him, but I had him for a long time. Miss him. He had a lot of yellow on his belly, too. And that's one thing I noticed was he didn't have the prettiest colors. He's not the most lemony ghost. But you can actually see on his neck. Look at that. He's got almost some Woma pattern there if you have an imagination. And so, but he has a lot of kind of greenish olive coloration, and his belly was 60% yellow. And after owning him for about 2 years, at that point, it was probably right after I hatched babies. I remember the one baby I kept back was really greenish. The other 2 I sold from that 3 that I produced. And I remember I went to the Run Reptile Show, and I was showing this guy off to people because I was so happy with him. I was look at his belly. He's unique. I thought he was probably a new morph. I was those ball python people that come in and they're they show a normal and they're what morph is this? This is new. So I was doing that with him. But I was I wasn't right at that time, but he ended up being a founding for a line trait. So this was a polygenic variant. And so I showed him to people, and people were that's nothing. They're that's just a locale thing, or that's just some normals look like that. And so I was okay, but then I know I was I don't see any other hoggos or any of the ones I own have bellies anything like this guy's. And in the first pairing, those first 3 babies, the one was pretty greenish and weird looking, so I kept that one. And then I sold the other 2. And then when I bred this guy to another wild-caught lineage females, probably when I was 13 years old, I think, at that point, I produced some pretty nice yellow ones. And then I know by the time I was 15, I produced one from this guy's founding line. So one of his babies bred to another yellowish hognose, some like neon, almost yellowish looking ones. And I should have sent you more pictures, but I posted them on my stories because I found some pictures from like 2006, or they may have been 2004 also, but they're either between 2004 and 2006 of lemon ghost females on eggs, and they weren't really at that point. You know, these are more recent ones. That's not what they looked like back then.
Yeah.
This is what lemon ghosts are today. These are like high quality, high percent ones here. The one on the left is a pure, and the one on the right is actually a 75%er. That's het sable. So anyway, yeah, by the time I was like 16, 17, I started calling them lemon ghost. And the name, why do they have the absurd name lemon ghost? Well, lemon because they're bright, lemony yellow, sometimes limeish green, but primarily yellow. And then the ghost part came from their bellies would sometimes be like really dirty and mostly black, and then sometimes they change to like all yellow. And a lot of them actually ended up not doing that. Only like the ones I produce nowadays, like that doesn't really happen. But polygenics, when you're line breeding, evolve over time. Like you can actually, I've seen it with leopard geckos many times where people are selectively line breeding for a particular look, and over the generations, it actually gets worse and away from their goal because they don't select the best ones for it, or they over hypo them out, and it doesn't look good for the phenotype that they're going for or what it's supposed to be. But in this case, the main reason I named them that was because I really, really, and I still do like ghost ball pythons. And I was so obsessed with ghost ball pythons because I liked that mutation because they had this really hazy, very pretty look that you just don't see, especially then, on any other mutations reptiles. So I kind of jacked the name and I named them lemon ghost.
There we go.
They're beautiful.
And the founder animal, that male, was one that came from the Armory show as well.
That was Noah. That was the Noah.
Noah? Okay.
Yeah, the Arctic, I'm pretty positive, and that the founding animal that I bred into my lemon ghost that I later found out were Arctics. That one I'm pretty sure is from the Armory, but the lemon ghost came from a young dude that was like in his mid-20s at the time, who had his friend that didn't want him to sell it so he could make an extra $15, maybe 15 or 20 bucks. If that guy's around, I'd like to thank him, but I don't think he's breeding reptiles anymore. Or keeping them. He wasn't even breeding. He was just keeping it as a pet. Anyway, but that was the founding animal right there, that one you've seen before. And I would say that was most likely, especially by the looks of that hognose, I'd guarantee that was, and especially because of the high numbers of them, that was like a Lubbock locality, plains.
Well, and for those who can't see the differences here, a cool thing from the founding picture, or the founding father, that picture compared to what it is now, you can see that difference. You can see where, the eye was, okay, this founding animal, there's something a little different, but then over time, you can see where it's now been refined into, that change. It's kind of like, the original Okeetees caught versus what Okeetees look like in the hobby now. So you have all the, and I'm going to put in quotes of, air quotes here, the characteristics of that founding father, but so much more exaggerated, I guess would be the right phrase or right word. And so, hopefully you guys can check this out on YouTube, because to me, it's neat to understand the true change that occurs in a line bred mutation. So that it starts with this subtle difference, that just this, where yes, it's something visual, but not anything where, oh my God, this thing is, they're normally black and this snake is white. It's not like that. But what can be done when enough attention and time is put into a project on something that's just a little bit different than the norm. And I mean, those are beautiful animals and significantly different from a normal.
So right now with the morphs, is there anything that this is a hell of a question to ask at the second hour mark. Is there any morph or line or combo or anything like that you're just like, whoa, I've got to do that? Or stay tuned and we'll see it in the next year.
Well, I mean, there's always morph combinations that I want to pursue. And with the availability of morphs that have come out more recently, there's a lot of things I want to pursue. And like Lemon Ghost. That's one that can be bred into a lot of projects that can really intensify a lot of recessives and incomplete doms, and kind of brighten and change the coloration of multi-combination genetic animals. But the thing is, Lemon Ghost, though, since it is a polygenic and it is selectively line bred, anytime you do these out crosses, you generally take away from it, and so you have to be breeding back. So these projects can be quite lengthy. So I do have some really fun projects with Lemon Ghost, but sometimes I take probably longer than a typical person, because I usually try to get them like 75% lineage, or at least above, like at least to 62.5% Lemon Ghost lineage before I start releasing them or coining a name. Because, you can take a Lemon Ghost that's pretty nice, breed it into something, raise those babies, breed them back, and say, oh, these are Lemon Ghost. And it's like, yeah, they have Lemon Ghost lineage, but it's not quite the same thing.
Sure.
And so that's part of the fun of polygenics. And the neat thing is, too, is, what you can do with them over a long period of time. In 80 years from now, what these are going to look like when I'm long gone is going to be very interesting. And the thing is, too, with these line bred traits like this, sometimes you can even spin them off, meaning you get a particular look and you start line breeding for that, such as Womas. Womas came from my Lemon Ghost, and that's how I founded that project, too, the Woma Lemon Ghost project. And actually, this female on the left, when I bred her back to a pure Lemon Ghost, I got these beautiful, just high-quality, pure Lemon Ghost. But when I bred back a pure Woma that is kind of deviated from her timeline, and it was originally from that project, but long separated, I bred a pure Woma back to her. And actually, this was that season. Those are the eggs that produced them. And the Womas that came out, like, I actually got a bunch of Womas. Cool. You'd expect that, like, there'd be like maybe some in there. Like, every single baby came out with like a high degree of Woma. So the Lemon Ghost still, even though they're outcrossed, or let's say they're not really outcrossed, the Woma deviated from that line, but Woma still reacts with that pure line. I can still get Woma pattern animals from a lot of these Lemon Ghosts that don't express any Woma, and when they bred to another Lemon Ghost, don't really ever usually produce Woma. So that's a neat thing, and that's like polygenics. It does appear so random, and that's because it kind of is, because there's multiple pairs of alleles that are contributing to these phenotypes, and it can be impossible to tell exactly what they have, as far as allele count that contributes to these Woma characteristics or just these bright yellow Lemon Ghost characteristics.
So cool.
Very, very cool. I need to pause for just a second to say this. Jeff, I admire your memory. Good Lord, man. Not only do you remember where all this came from, but your memory of years. And I'm just thinking, 2004, what the hell was I doing? And so, so for you to have all that, man, that's it shows the passion, and it shows your dedication to the species, as well as what you've done with it. So
sure.
I had to tip my hat to that. It's not like you came in prepared. It's not like we said, we're going to talk about this, and this. So if you want to go ahead and put your notes together, and be ready. So
I said,
fantastic,
I like freestyling stuff. I got freestyle it. Actually, every time I try to prepare stuff, it's usually when it goes wrong.
That's what we say all the time.
Yes, that's what we tell guests. Guests, like, they ask if we'll give them an idea what the questions are going to be. And we're like, no, we don't do that, because it does end up being very choppy. It's almost like if you have a planned series of events or questions, as soon as one thing goes off, the whole thing just crashes, because you can't get back in your rhythm. No, that's not what we do here. So, but I mean, again, for the information, the data for you to have just in your mind on these is quite impressive, my friend. So kudos to you.
Yeah, well, I'm very interested in all this stuff, and I've always kind of paid attention to that, and and even like looking at wild hognose and then watching people's accounts or stories, it's like that stuff interests me, because like lots of locales, they look fairly different from one another. Now, the northern locales, they're tough, like Wyoming, Montana, Dakota region, Minnesota hognose, the Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan hognose, they all kind of look the same. Like if you show me like an Alberta hognose, I might say I'm like, oh, it looks like a Minnesota one. But then like the Illinois populations, the Colorado populations, they have a particular look generally. New Mexico have a very particular look the majority of the time. And then West Texas kind of has this somewhat kind of like particular look. And then Oklahoma kind of does as well. Then the isolated one population, Missouri, they have a very unique look. And some people call those dusty hognose. And yeah, that's ridiculous. You ever talk to Curtis Eckerman about that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sure have.
Yeah, that's a weird one.
They don't exist.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I remember my mom would tell this story because she's like, there's a college professor from the university. I can't remember, like, and I was like, oh yeah, Curtis Eckerman. She's like, called and wanted to talk to my son. I'm like, well, you didn't really want to call and talk to me. He was calling me back because I called him. And I had this gripe about the gloidai because it didn't exist. There was no scale count difference. And there wasn't really, it was just like a slight variation of a phenotype.
Very slight.
Very vague. And they said, this is.
Oh no.
I think try to call you out. But it's like I think somebody just wanted to have a subspecies discovered, so they're like, all right, I'm going to make this a subspecies.
Actually, Platt in 1969 went so far as to say, yeah, this doesn't exist. And there's some people that are working with hognose DNA, and all I'm going to say is that that hypothesis is supported, and that's it, because I'm not allowed to talk about that paper.
Gotcha.
So anyway.
The Missouri locale do have a unique look, though. They are a little different if you look at them. But, that's the thing. It's just a locality, isolated locality. There's isolated localities all through there. Illinois has like a few of them. The funny thing is, like, sometimes I look at Illinois hognose, and the only ones I get those confused with are sometimes Colorado. It's interesting that sometimes I'll see Colorado ones and Illinois ones that look very similar, especially as neonates.
No, very cool.
Very
All right. Well, we don't want to keep you too much longer. We're at 2 hours and 10 minutes for crying out loud. So
I think we probably should hit our final question at this point. Yeah.
So we ask everybody this question, and I'm very curious to hear your perspective. So you can talk about herpetoculture in general, or you can talk about hognose snakes specifically. Go whatever direction you want. But we always ask, what do you think the current state and the future state of herpetoculture is going to be? You like what you're seeing? Do you not like what you're seeing? Go whatever direction you want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think things evolved and changed a lot and are going in a better direction. When I first entered the reptile hobby, I'd go to shows. It's mostly wild caught stuff, and there's stories of like people. There's one guy, his nickname was Dead Tom, because he'd have a lot of dead imports that come in with good looking stuff. And these are like not good stories, very bad stories, very bad for herpetoculture. But the good news is there's way less of that now. And, and I don't really deal with any importers anymore or around it much at all, but I still hear some stories, and it sounds like things are better as far as animals being imported compared to what it was like 20 years ago. A lot more captive propagation, a lot more scientific research going into husbandry. Some of that leads into there's these different cliques of people that are like, bioactive naturalists and they use UV with everything. And they think if you don't, you're completely wrong. And then there's, people like me and everybody's still kind of trying to navigate around there and get along. But I think most of it's for the positive. Not everybody's going to agree on everything. And I think, with social media, even though there's a lot of arguing on a particular platform sometimes, I think everything's going in a better direction, and I think that's where it's going to continue to go. U.S. ARC has our back with fighting, stringent regulations, and they've been pretty good at staving them off, and U.S. ARC has been getting more support and getting more financing, and it really seems like these laws that we used to be terrified of are now bouncing off more and more easily. And I know U.S. ARC took on 2 people they announced at Daytona that are lawyers, and they also have a background in biology, if I'm remembering correctly. So these are actually animal people, and it seems like U.S. ARC is, getting a lot stronger, as I just said. And so, yeah, I think everything's going to go, well in that aspect. For reptile breeding and everything, the hognose market, is going to remain good because hognose snakes are cute. People love their faces, and they're popular on TikTok.
And they're little. They're little.
Little.
Yeah.
They're little. But one thing is prices are going to continue to come down. This market will evolve and change. because it will get more saturated because there's more popularity and the volume of them being produced is increasing. So you have the volume number, and Clint mentioned that earlier, and same thing with these reptile shows. If there's a lot of volume, it's going to, bring prices down and things are going to be a little more competitive. So, but overall, I think I like the way, things are going. Things look good. Things are always changing though. Like look at Morph Market. That changed everything. Like I feel like every 5 years there's some big new thing happening that's kind of changing the market completely. Whether it be the internet, King Snake, fauna classifieds, reptile shows, and then social media. Facebook was a big changer. Then Instagram, TikTok. Now we have Morph Market. And then AI. I don't know what the hell that's going to do, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It's going to do something, and then in 5 years it's going to be this is changed to the AI. So, but overall, I think things are going pretty well.
Okay, I like the positivity.
Absolutely.
All right, dude. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We will have you on again, if you're willing to. This was great. All right, sweet. So, if people want to reach out to you, want to see your stuff, where do you recommend they go?
Download Instagram and then follow me on Instagram. Unless you already have Instagram, follow me there or hit the unblock button and then refollow me. So do one of those three things, and that's where I'm most active. I do post on Facebook a little bit, and then I, of course, have Morph Market. But my Instagram is primarily just Hognose pictures, Hognose memes, content. I post on my stories regularly. I'm not really pushing sales there, but I'm just sharing Hognose stuff. So it's a really fun one to just join if you want to be part of the Hognose community, and mainly just a part of my, just my little piece of my life, James G. Reptile.
And shout out your podcast.
Oh yeah, I do a podcast too. Yeah. MJ's listening to this. You'll be, dude, what are you doing? But yeah, under the Trap Talk Network, I have my own segment every other Friday. I'm actually doing one this Friday, and I really freestyle these. I still don't know who my next guest is. It might just be me walking around the reptile show talking to people because I have to go to Hillsborough this weekend. So yeah, the Trap Talk Network every other Friday. It's a Cooler Bridge segment. So it's thank God it's Fridays. Cooler Bridge segment. So yeah, you can tune into that, and I even post it on my stories when I'm going live with that and everything, and those are a good time.
We always love to shout out other Colubrid podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that we believe on this show is, when it comes to podcasts, there's not competition. This is all just us continuing to build that community of individuals that love this segment, of the keeping hobby. So check out Jeff's show. I was on it with you. I had a blast. It's a great time. So give him a follow and see what we got going on over there.
Thank you.
All righty. Well, thank you, Jeff, for coming on. Wonderful meeting you, and I'm sure we're going to keep on talking now that we know each other. So
yeah, thanks, Zach.
That's definitely happening. So, Clint, where can people find you?
You can find me at metazotics@gmail.com. Facebook is where we normally are updating what's going on in the shop. So that's, of course, Metazotics. On Instagram, it's MetazoticsLLC. And as always, if you're looking for a new animal or product, jump on metazotics.com and use code CCRadio for 5% off of anything that you order on metazotics.com.
Yes. And me, Dr. Crawdad on Instagram, Zac Loughman on Facebook. You can email me. Today, I posted up a graduate assistantship position on the Texas A&M job board for indigo snake conservation. So I'm going to be doing a master's thesis down at OCIC with Dr. Bogan. We're going to be looking at metabolic rates in eastern indigo snakes at different life stages, because everybody says dry market has a fast metabolism. But when you go into the scientific literature, nobody's actually proven that. And in science, you can't really say it is until you prove it, which is part of the reason why the bull snakes have been purchased, because we're going to be comparing a lot of large colubrid and colubroids metabolically. And whoever gets this gig, you get to spend at least a month and a half to 2 months down at OCIC with the indigo snakes all day long. And then we damn it, we have to do a herp survey of the OCIC grounds. And we're going to be building those drip fences I was talking about. And I mean, I'm literally making this my dream thesis I didn't get to do. So if you made it this far, you graduated, you're thinking about grad school, you've thought about this a while, now is your chance. Look it up, message me, and that is that. So be it morning, afternoon, evening, or night, whatever time of day it is, hope you had a good one. Later, y'all.